AP Psychedelics, Going Beyond Set and Setting to Achieve Visionary Virtuosity by Manseau. Copyright 2022, Popular Psionics Press. Part 1, Introduction. This book's title is inexact. It's called AP Psychedelics, but it's not about all psychedelics. The training method I'm going to describe is based on my work with psilocybin mushrooms, in combination with various turbo boosters like harmaline, marijuana, DMT, and tobacco. This approach doesn't seem to work with LSD. At least for me it didn't. And it's never been tried with ayahuasca, MDMA, ibogaine, San Pedro, or other mind-manifesting medicines. Might it work with them? It might, rabbit, it might. Or might not. Fortis fortuna adiuvat. Also, caveat emptor. Why psilocybin mushrooms? Psilocybin mushrooms amplify emotions, but they also respond to emotions. What you're feeling influences what you see. That means if you can control your emotions, you can control your mushroom-based psychedelic journeys. Controlling emotion doesn't necessarily mean suppression. It can also be accomplished by choosing a set of aesthetic emotions and then intentionally experiencing them. Aesthetic emotions are those aroused by art like music or film. A familiar example would be the sense of exhilarated triumph you might feel when the Death Star explodes at the climax of Star Wars. If you're on a sufficiently high dose of psilocybin mushrooms, intense concentration on aesthetic emotions will unlock layer upon layer of meaningful visionary experience. Everything from confronting the contents of your shadow, up to and including visiting the afterlife and getting a little one-on-one time with the deity of your choice. Via the concepts and techniques this book explains, such experiences are consistently available to anyone. All it takes is courage, discipline, and effort. Eternity is in love with the productions of time. Once upon a time, there was a straight line who was hopelessly in love with a dot. Unfortunately, the dot much prefers the company of a squiggle. At the little jukebox cafe where their crowd likes to hang out, the line stands off to the side, watching them dance. Wild, unkempt, and always on his way to the next good time, the squiggle is the opposite of the line, whom the dot derides as stiff and dull. The line must admit, she makes a point. He wishes he could be different, free like the squiggle. He wants the flexibility to boogie. How, though? A line is as a line does. But the dot has awakened in him a sense of his true passionate nature and the urge to express it. Maybe, just maybe, he can change. So he tries to change and fails, and tries again and fails again, and tries and fails and tries and fails and tries and fails until one day, making a final, gargantuan, I'll succeed or die effort, he makes an angle. Right at the center of his being, he bends. For the first time, he experiences the thrill of self-overcoming. It feels so good, he does it again. One bend becomes two, two become three. It's mind-blowing, so much so that his initial thrill curdles to terror. Really, he should straighten himself out immediately. He should get back in line with the rest of the lines. He doesn't, though. He keeps practicing adopting new shapes. It's not easy. In fact, it's hard as hell, and often he feels like crying from frustration. He fears he's wasting his life on a fool's errand, but he perseveres. The trick, he learns, is to concentrate. By the time he's learned to take the form of anything from a simple cube to the excruciatingly beautiful filigree of the Mandelbrot set, he can focus like a yogi entering samadhi. As a result, he transcends his limitations. No longer stiff and dull, now he is dazzlingly versatile, mysterious, compelling, and profound. The time comes to show the dot. The line finds her with the squiggle, dancing to the latest hit record on the jukebox. Just inside the cafe's entrance, balked by nerves, he tarries and observes. The squiggle lurches this way and that. He stretches up high, then plunges into a tangle, waving his wriggling tendrils and crying, "Yeah, man, yeah!" After a few minutes, the line realizes the squiggle is just doing the same steps over and over and over. How had he never noticed before? What looks like wild freedom is in fact a kind of prison, a labyrinth with walls made of the choice to do what's always been done, to avoid challenge. The line had been an inmate of similar confinement. He is grateful to have escaped. Now he's on the road to fulfilling his potential. Formula for happiness, he tells himself. A straight line, a goal. When the dot sees the line shyly moving toward her, she says, "Oh, it's you again." She starts to turn away, only to do a double take as the line begins to flow into the elegantly intertwined circles of the flower of life. And then, who do you want to be? I'm not going to tell you how this little love triangle plays out. If you're interested, get on YouTube and search for a cartoon called The Dot and the Line, a Romance in Lower Mathematics. It's a hoot. You should know the way I tell this tale isn't quite what Norton Juster wrote and Chuck Jones directed. I've adapted the story to help illustrate the following premises. The choices we make define our character. This character can manifest as discipline. Discipline creates skill. Skill applied over time realizes achievement. Achievement makes for a more meaningful life. This book presents a thesis based on these premises. The thesis is that training with psychedelic medicine in a progressive, skill-building manner can lead to the realization of one's physical, emotional, intellectual, spiritual, cognitive, creative, social, and moral potential. I'm going to describe a way to become a line who can bend. Interested? Part 2. Concepts. Let's start with an oversimplification. You could say that in the modern era, there have been essentially two approaches to using psychedelics, or as I like to call them, the substantia. The therapist's couch. The first approach is highly individual. You take the substantia alone in a dark room, or on a psychologist's couch, or out in nature. Its goal is healing or self-knowledge. The appeal is that the setting makes it easy to focus on your inner experience. The downside is that you are deprived of the opportunity to develop communitas, a feeling of belonging to a group that has shared the transient personal feeling of togetherness. Some people might not consider that a downside. They prefer to journey alone. That's cool. The Boom Festival. The second is highly collective. Its goal is recreation. You're seeking an amazing good time. Examples would be dropping acid at Grateful Dead shows, or taking 2CB at Burning Man, or candy flipping at a Psytrance festival. The appeal is experiencing the exultant energy of merging with a group. The downside is that the emphasis on ecstatic joy can severely limit the potential developmental benefits of the psychedelic experience. Some people might not consider that a downside. They prefer to only feel good. That's cool too, I guess. The fitness class. In this book, I'm going to describe a third approach. It works whether you're alone or with others. It builds skill with psychedelic medicines to realize specific short and long-term goals. The appeal is that it's a reliable means for achieving that grandmother of all peak experiences, gnosis, the direct and immediate knowledge of the divine. And when practiced in a group setting, this approach allows you to channel collective energy into the private work of self-inquiry. The downside is that in the course of training, you will occasionally suffer. Sorry, kid. As Ben Franklin once said, there are no gains without pains. The goal of this third approach is virtuosity. Virtuosity. Skill is the learned ability to accomplish specific tasks. Virtuosity is the ability to demonstrate great skill and make it look easy. In the psychedelic domain, visionary skill is the difference between being a passive recipient of the substantia's effects and having active agency in terms of how these effects manifest. Visionary virtuosity is using this agency to demonstrate supranormal psychological and spiritual capacities. The phonomantic method. For now, at least, I'm calling this third approach the phonomantic method. It's based on the practice of phonomancy. Phonomancy is a way to induce visionary trance states via singing and dancing along to popular music while under the influence of a high dose of psychedelic medicine. Eventually, it includes complex psychological tasks, visualization exercises, and sacerdotal oblations. Later, we'll discuss those activities in detail. The phonomantic method has a ceremonial aspect. It involves the performance of sequenced acts of phonomancy in a ceremony known as a phonomantic rite under progressively more challenging conditions. It also has a training aspect that includes any personal development undertaken to improve performance within ceremony. If you're a recreational user, the phonomantic method might seem like too much work. If you're someone who is primarily interested in using psychedelics to treat trauma, depression, or addiction issues, you might find it alarming or even dangerous. That's because the phonomantic method is not therapeutic. It's augmentative. What's new, pussycat? Everyone knows music and psychedelic journey go together like chocolate and peanut butter. What makes the phonomantic method different from listening while you trip to the Kyoto monks or Psytrance or J.S. Bach and grooving on whatever comes up? Tactically, it's not the use of music, it's the way that it's used. We'll discuss that in much more depth in a bit. Strategically, what makes the phonomantic method different is the practical application of its conceptual innovations. Since the early 1960s, set and setting have been regarded as the determining conditions for a beneficial psychedelic experience. To these considerations, the phonomantic method adds 3 more S's: structure, stress, and skill. Set and setting. Dr. Timothy Leary coined the term set and setting to refer to the influence one's inner and outer environments can have over the psychedelic experience. According to Leary, set denotes the preparation of the individual, including his personality structure and his mood at the time. Setting is physical, the weather, the room's atmosphere; social, feelings of persons present towards one another; and cultural, prevailing views as to what is real. In other words, if you dose in a noisy, chaotic, unpredictable environment, it increases the likelihood that you'll become anxious or frightened and have a challenging experience. If you dose while upset or depressed, your psychedelic journey will likely reflect that. 60 years later, it's taken as conventional wisdom by the psychedelic community that the optimal set and setting is one in which potential discomforts have been minimized. Programming. In an article titled On Programming Psychedelic Experiences, Leary and his colleague Ralph Metzner discuss controlling the content of a psychedelic experience in a specified direction by using environmental stimuli in a predetermined manner. Leary went on to say that he distinguished programming for different types of sessions: diagnosis, therapy, intellectual understanding, aesthetic appreciation, and interpersonal relationships. To these ends, he would employ imagery like tantric mandalas, tapes of pre-recorded chanting, readings from sacred texts like the Tibetan Book of the Dead, music from Ravi Shankar et al., and more. These would be chosen in cooperation with the patient and deployed at various points in an attempt to influence their inner experience. The goal, he said, was the most important application of session programming, that of learning to control one's own nervous system. Yes, Tim, that's foundational to visionary skill. Where the action is. Leary's experiments with programming were a good start. Structure, stress, and skill are psychedelic programming 2.0. Structure makes it possible to shape the psychedelic experience. Stress turns the experience into planned opportunities to grow across multiple dimensions of self. Skill allows one to obtain more information from each experience and to participate in group efforts that can be a force multiplier. In this programming model, discomfort is actively sought out and engaged, because that's where the action is. Structure. Although Leary regarded programming as part of set and setting, the phonomantic method pushes the concept so far it requires a new category: structure. In this context, structure covers a lot of ground. First, it means committing to a schedule, that is, a playlist of songs, during the psychedelic session. Next, it means organizing the playlist into a formal ceremony composed of ritual events. Third, it refers to the fact that these ritual events will communicate implicit or explicit narratives. Finally, a phonomantic trainee will be tasked with performing activities that effectively make her, him, or them the protagonist of these narratives. Schedule. 4 hours is the length of the average psilocybin-based psychedelic journey, and the phonomantic method requires you to plan out every minute from ingestion to return to sobriety. This might seem impractical, if not impossible. How is somebody supposed to stick with one thing while tripping? You're supposed to be free to roam around and hug trees, or to lay on the floor in the fetal position if that's what you feel like, or listen to the dark side of the moon, maybe while climbing a tree to talk to the moon. Look, nobody's saying there's anything wrong with experiences that are desultory, spontaneous, and just plain fun. But if that's all you ever do, well, you're being a squiggle. You can have deeper spiritual experiences and achieve greater personal development if you cultivate the discipline to follow a planned course of action, even in an altered state of consciousness. Making a schedule of activities for your journey and sticking to it, even when you don't feel like it, is the first step in becoming a lion who can bend. Ceremony. A ceremony is a formal act or series of acts prescribed by ritual, protocol, or convention. Ceremonies set an experience apart from the general flow of experience. As such, they have a beginning, a middle, and an end. As I write, the 2022 Winter Olympics are being held in Beijing. The Olympics have an opening ceremony, then the athletic events, then a closing ceremony. A traditional Christian wedding has a processional, the officiant welcome, the vows, the rings, the recessional, etc. Similarly, a phonomantic rite should be organized in a manner that opens a space separate from ordinary reality, holds the space for ritual events, then closes the space to help the trainees re-enter the everyday world. Narrative. Stories convey meaning. The phonomantic method employs this property of stories to amplify and anchor the impact of a psychedelic experience by placing it in nested imaginal contexts. At the top level, a phonomantic rite has a frame story. This frame story can be understood as the setting for an alternate reality game, or ARG, in which a problem is identified, the direness of its threat established, and the participant invited to resolve the situation by overcoming challenges. These challenges involve identifying with the protagonist of several narratives delivered within the game's frame story. Success depends on the extent to which the participant can identify with and subjectively experience the protagonist's emotional response to trials and triumphs, that is, feel those feelings. The feelings that arise from identification with a character in a story are aesthetic emotions. Aesthetic emotions experienced in a certain sequence trigger the explosive release of tension known as catharsis. In drama, catharsis is purification and purgation of emotions through dramatic art. In psychology, it's the expression of buried trauma, bringing it into consciousness and thereby releasing it permanently. In the phonomantic method, both definitions apply, as well as a third, metaphysical meaning we'll discuss later. When one experiences catharsis in a psychedelically altered state of consciousness, all kinds of interesting things can happen. Activity. In the context of a phonomantic rite, achieving catharsis depends on the participant's ability to perform prescribed tasks that have ritual meaning. As a trainee's skill increases, so does the complexity of the tasks with which she or he or they can engage. The initial ritual task is simply sticking to the playlist. Don't deviate, don't quit. Next is entering into the target emotional space of each song. The third is embodying this emotion by dancing. The fourth task is embodying the emotion by singing along. The fifth is changing one's experience of the song by interpreting the lyrics to mean something different than what the composer may have intended. The sixth is engaging in psychological self-inquiry and visualization exercises based in the song's target emotion. The seventh and final task is utilizing tertiary process thinking, more on this later, to open yourself to the experience of transpersonal energies. Each task is foundational to the next. They accrue in layers. Ultimately, you perform all seven simultaneously in a gestalt. It's not whether you win or lose. These activities are not so much responsibilities as the way you play the game. And like with any game, the more you play, the better you get. Stress. Stress, in the sense of a state of mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from adverse or very demanding circumstances, is what Set and Setting was designed to mitigate. For people using psychedelics as part of a therapeutic attempt to heal old traumas or deal with certain mental health issues, that's important. The wounded and the ill need all the soothing calm they can get. The comfortable couch in the tastefully decorated office, the headphones playing classical music, the sitter nearby who can offer a reassuring hand. The psychologically healthy don't necessarily need that level of support when they use psychedelics. In fact, they may very well benefit from the opposite of support. I stress, you stress. Stress is not always a bad thing. The endocrinologist Hans Selye coined the term eustress, meaning good stress. Eustress is not defined by stressor type, but rather how one perceives that stressor, that is, a negative threat versus a positive challenge. It refers to a positive response one has to a stressor, which can depend on one's current feelings of control, desirability, location, and timing of the stressor. Eustress can be understood as being the concept of hormesis applied to psychology. Hormesis, a term borrowed from toxicology, means the intermittent application of moderate stress to a system. In biological systems, this usually results in a favorable adaptive response. Think of the dread Pirate Roberts in the book and film The Princess Bride, who took trace amounts of poisonous iocane powder over time to build up an immunity he used to defeat a lisping Sicilian in a battle of wits. Hormesis can also be used to interpret the response of the human body to exercise. A body pushed to its limit in terms of force production, say by back squatting a heavy barbell to near failure, will respond to that mechanical stress by increasing muscle mass and bone density. A body pushed to its limit in terms of cardiovascular endurance via repeated sprints will increase its ability to metabolize oxygen. These beneficial adaptations to physical stress are systemic and involuntary. Analogous benefit from mental stress, though, depends on conscious framing. It's the decision to interpret the stress one experiences as beneficial that turns it into eustress. PT versus S&C. If traditional psychedelic therapy is comparable to physical therapy, a practice intended to help the injured return to normal functioning, then the phonomantic method is like a strength and conditioning program designed to develop in healthy people capacities far beyond the norm. In the phonomantic method, this is accomplished by subjecting prepared, consenting trainees to stress while they are in an altered state of consciousness. Stressor types. The stressors the phonomantic method utilizes to stimulate adaptive response fall into 5 categories: dosage, environmental external, environmental internal, environmental transpersonal, and task-based. Dosage. The more of the substantia you take, the higher you get. Sometimes that's not as fun as it sounds. Overpowering intoxication can be a source of physical, emotional, cognitive, and spiritual stress. Environmental external. A phonomantic rite can take place in a theatrical context that includes flashing lights, aggressive music played at loud volume, performers in costume, narratives to follow, music videos, dramatic tableau, fellow participants dealing with difficult experiences, and more. These elements are included to help shape the participant's aesthetic experience, but may prove so stimulating as to be a source of stress. Environmental internal. Phonomancy involves intentionally entering emotional states that may exhume painful memories, unhappy realizations, and otherwise inspire powerful feelings of uncanniness or alarm. These feelings can be a source of stress. Environmental transpersonal. Especially at high doses, participants are exposed to shamanic reality. We'll talk more about this later, but for now understand that during a phonomantic rite, actually in any psychedelic experience, participants can have the subjective experience of encountering predatory or parasitic spiritual entities. Dealing with their active attempts to inflict harm can be a source of stress. On the flip side, one may also be exposed to frequencies of benevolent energy so powerful it's like being struck by a lightning bolt of love. Regaining cogitative organization in the aftermath of such experiences can also be a stressor. Task-based. Task-based stressors in phonomancy run the gamut from staying on your feet and dancing when stoner lassitude would prefer you stay in your chair, to navigating while tripping on a superheroic dose of substantia, the complex challenge of changing costumes in the dark during a 2-minute break between songs as you mount a psychic defense against the demonic entity who wants to kill you. Don't be dissuaded. You may read that list of stressors and think, that sounds terrible. Why would I want to put myself through any of that? The short answer is because learning to bend is worth it. The longer answer is that while it can be grueling, practicing phonomancy is incredibly fun. You'll experience contemplative calm, glamorous elan, swashbuckling adventure, celestial wonder, superstitious terror, radiant peace, abyssal heartbreak, salvific joy, and sheer rock and roll fuck yeah. Phonomancy can help you feel more strongly than you ever have in your life. Also, phonomantic stressors are training implements: barbells to press, kettlebells to swing, tires to flip. Working with them yields transformative results, and the intensity of required effort coupled with the satisfaction of overcoming challenge is addictive in the best possible way. As we used to say at my old CrossFit gym about particularly tough workouts, God, that sucked. I can't wait to do it again. Progression. This approach to psychedelics is based on a concept borrowed from the world of strength training: progressive resistance, in which participants exercise their muscles against some type of resistance that is progressively increased as their strength improves. Progressive resistance, administered properly, begins with the minimum effective dose, or MED, of skeletal muscle stress necessary to elicit an adaptive response. Even a healthy college-age trainee learning the barbell back squat exercise should start with only the bar, which weighs 45 pounds. After first exposure, weight can be added in conservative 5 to 10 pound increments per session as the trainee develops strength, and then only if correct form is maintained. Similarly, new phonomantic trainees should begin with an MED of the substantia, usually somewhere between 1.5 to 3 grams, and only increase the amount when they become comfortable with the method's tasks and trials. Use similar caution when introducing the other stressors we've discussed. There's no rush. Just as a novice strength trainee should not try to squat 315 pounds just to see how they do, a tyrophonomancer would be ill-advised to jump in the deep end by attending a group ceremony on a 1/4 ounce of mushrooms. They would be overwhelmed and possibly traumatized. First, do no harm to yourself. To be clear, the phonomantic method is a training program intended to inculcate mastery, not cause harm. Only those who meet a baseline of mental health, psychedelic experience, and emotional toughness should attempt it. If you've got any doubts, then you're not ready. Stick with the therapeutic or recreational approaches. Skills. Earlier, skill was defined as the ability to accomplish tasks, and we learned that visionary skill, which allows for active utilization of the effects of the substantia, is based on control of one's nervous system. This is the difference between an ayahuasca-drinking shaman maintaining the lucidity to sing sacred healing songs and hold space, and her ayahuasca-drinking patients lying on their mats, so mareado, or dizzy, they can barely stand, let alone think coherently. Visionary skill. Let's refine that characterization. In the context of the phonomantic method, visionary skill will now refer to mastery of dosage, environmental, and task-based stressors. Not just tolerating them, but being able to harness the nervous arousal they cause to access deeper levels of consciousness. Visionary skill is also a measure of one's ability to realize entheogenic trance states via concentration, visualization exercises, and the intentional adoption of certain cognitive processes and interpretive models. Visionary skill can be broken into 6 related but distinct sub-skills: courage, clarity, self-control, self-overcoming, anti-fragility, and emotional flexibility. To consciously engage these skills is to leave squiggleness behind. Courage. Sometimes before you consume the substantia, you might, rightfully, feel knee-knocking dread over the tremendous dimension you're about to enter. Sometimes 2 hours into ceremony, you'll realize that third hit of pot wasn't the best decision you've ever made, and now you're stuck in a time loop and it's freaking you out. Sometimes you'll see ugly, perverse images, or feel the presence of malevolent entities, or become convinced you'll never be loved again. Accomplishing your goals in the face of such challenges requires courage. Courage is the ability to act in spite of fear. It's a quality, but it's also a skill that can be learned by doing. Clarity. Remaining on task while coping with stressors requires clarity. In the phonomantic method, clarity refers to a state of cogitative organization virtually indistinguishable from sober lucidity, a state maintained no matter how high the dose. It also means the ability to sustain a definite intention while switching one's focus at will from a single object of attention to a global awareness of one's inner and outer environments, and back. As a skill, clarity is improved by the imposition over time of progressively higher levels of stress that must be navigated and processed to achieve one's goals. Self-control. When practicing the phonomantic method alone, self-control is mostly about not making decisions that will derail your intention, like quitting halfway through because you're tired, or calling your ex-boyfriend while tripping to explain some new insight about why things went wrong with your relationship, or running outside in your underwear to tell your neighbor why things went wrong with your ex-boyfriend. When practicing with others, monitoring and managing your behavior becomes paramount, because a lapse in your self-control can adversely affect the experience of those around you. You must be able to compel yourself to perform all ritual actions in the appropriate ways, and you must be able to regulate your response to any difficult emotions that arise for you. In ceremony, that's how you respect people's space not only physically, but psychologically. Self-overcoming. Every once in a while in ceremony, you just won't want to. It'd be easier to just lay down and dream, or sit in your chair and laugh, or curl up on the floor and wait to die, than be on your feet dancing and doing the psychological work the phonomantic method requires. Although there will be occasions when you just can't. From personal experience, I can attest that if you're vulnerable and certain inimical transpersonal forces get enough leverage, your resolve will break when the suffering becomes too much. Most of the time, you can, if you're willing to exert the effort to self-overcome. Is it difficult? Yes. Is it painful? Sometimes. Is it worth it? Hell yes. Whether it's plain laziness or the natural predator of the psyche that you have to get past, self-overcoming is how we grow. Anti-fragility. Anti-fragility is a property of systems that actually grow more robust in response to shocks and stress. The human body is inherently anti-fragile. The human psyche is not. Psychic anti-fragility requires a conscious choice to interpret discomfort as beneficial. It's how stress is transformed into eustress. Via the phonomantic method, your capacity to make that choice and to absorb larger and larger shocks without getting overwhelmed can be improved. When things get uncomfortable in your internal or external environment during ceremony, simply reframe the involuntary thought, "This sucks," as, "I love how much this sucks," and come up with a reason why you do. It's a powerful technique for controlling the psychedelic experience, and if you can make this reframing reflexive, you'll have a useful new life skill. Emotional flexibility. The phonomantic method depends on your ability to adopt, at will, the target emotional states of the songs you are working with. While the process is greatly aided by the amplifying effect of psilocybin mushrooms, the degree to which you can enter a given emotion, especially one that is uncommon in your experience or even anathema to you, and your ability to transition from one emotion to the next are determined by your emotional flexibility. Emotional flexibility is the ability to flexibly regulate emotions in a context-appropriate manner and to recover from the primary emotional response when the context changes, thereby creating a best possible match with the ever-changing environment. As with the other sub-skills, emotional flexibility improves with effort over time. This has the effect of deepening the experiences available in ceremony, but also in life. A determined effort to experience more kinds of emotion more strongly, while also paying careful attention to subtle variations and nuances, will make you a more complex human being. What's the secret, Max? How does one develop these visionary skills? The same way you get to Carnegie Hall, according to the beatnik cab driver in the old joke, practice, man, practice. To get good at this stuff, you must do it a lot. So we must say pake to the therapist couch model, which recommends 2 to 3 sessions spread out over a year, then hanging up the phone when you get the message, and to the Boom Festival model, which makes no recommendations at all regarding schedule. The phonomantic method is not for those so new to psychedelics that every journey yields worldview transforming insights that require months to integrate. It's for those who have come to terms with the reality of the unconscious and its unimaginable depths, and thus can handle immersing themselves once or twice a month for years. This can be done without inordinate risk of psychic injury. A psilocybin using curandera might journey 50 times a year, and ayahuasqueros work 150 plus nights a year for decades. If they can do it, so can we. The practice of shamanism grows from practicing with the tools of shamanism, and the phonomantic method is no exception. Begin by training with the phonomantic method alone, or in private with a couple trusted friends. Practice until you're reasonably certain you've got a handle on the basics. Then seek out a group to work out with. Of course, at this point, you likely still have no idea how to move any of the concepts we've looked at out of theory and into application. What are you supposed to practice? What are you supposed to practice with? To answer, let me start by explaining how the phonomantic method was developed. Part 3. Development. Caveat. To this point, discussion of the phonomantic method has mostly been confined to theory. The tone has been colloquial, but I've tried to present the concepts as objectively as possible. In this and later sections, as we look at how that theory is applied, things are going to get decidedly, unavoidably, possibly offensively subjective. The specific way I approach phonomancy and the phonomantic method will work well for people with energetic structures similar to mine, which is to say, we like some of the same things. If you enjoy glam rock, grunge, and heavy metal from the 1970s through the 2000s, pop, new wave, and funk from the same eras, and the indie folk stylings of Neutral Milk Hotel, hoo boy, have I got something in store for you. If you find that music anathema, what's wrong with you? I kid. Different strokes, it takes all kinds, etc., etc. If that music really doesn't ring your bells, but you find yourself intrigued by this approach and want to try it out, I'll try to include enough information about the design thinking that went into creating the phonomantic method's first working prototype that you'll be able to apply the principles to creating your own phonomantic rites. Ad hoc. In late 2016, at a personal and professional crossroads, I began working with ayahuasca. As difficult as the journeys could be, and my first time with Aya was one of the most miserable nights of my life, I got a lot out of it and eventually participated in 36 ceremonies. Due to business travel in May of 2017, I was unable to sit with my ayahuasca group that month. Instead, I decided to do my own ad hoc, at-home ceremony with some mushrooms that had been sitting in my freezer for 6 months. After ingesting a 4-gram dose, I lay listening to a Spotify playlist I'd made. Things were going normally enough, a little anxiety in my gut, some lovely spiraling fractals and delicate colors blooming behind my eyelids, until I reached the song "O Comely." Eureka! In a hallucinatory Michel Gondry kind of way, "O Comely" is about Anne Frank and her horrible fate. As I listened, I started to get very vivid images of concentration camps. I saw barbed wire, churned frozen mud, windowless brick buildings with smoking chimneys. At the same time, I was seized by powerful feelings of shame and sorrow. These emotions grew so strong it was like I'd grabbed an electric fence. Powerful energetic currents were surging through my body. The sensation quickly became excruciating. Something in me said, hold on to it. So I did, fists bunched, arms shaking. The song was just so beautiful and so sad and so tender and so brave, it felt like my heart would burst. At its climax, I spontaneously took a huge breath and blew the energy clutched in my right hand out into the world. I repeated the process on the left. Then I collapsed back in my chair, wondering what the hell had just happened. I had no idea the combination of music and psychedelics could do that. Eureka! After gathering my wits, I spent the rest of the evening experimenting to see what kind of visionary effects I could get with other songs. Nothing was as powerful as that Neutral Milk Hotel track, but still, the results were fascinating. With my eyes closed, I saw things. Not just colors or abstract shapes, but symbolic images that emerged to hover at the edge of conscious awareness, like hypnagogic hallucinations, and these seemed influenced by the emotional tone of whatever music was playing. Phonogram. A friend I consulted about my experience turned me on to a comic book called Phonogram. It's about a group of young and hip Brits who use pop songs as fuel for doing Harry Potter-style magic. Reading it, I went from eureka to holy shit. These Brits called their practice phonomancy, and although in the book the characters weren't using psychedelics, still it was a blueprint for my own future activities. Immediately, I adopted the term. Dance fever. Eager to explore further, I bought some more mushrooms and held another DIY ceremony. It too was a smashing success. Then the next weekend I was at it again. What almost all the songs I selected had in common was danceability. I'm not a great or even good dancer, but I love to dance, and I found that dancing was a productive way to work with the energy of a mushroom high, which could easily morph into agita if I didn't do something with it, especially once I started adding marijuana into the mix. But there was another, better reason to dance. The harder I got down, the more intense my closed and open-eyed visuals became. Neon-bright filaments of light formed into hieroglyphs and technical schematics in the air around me. Sparks and runes popped from my fingertips. This was full-blown Doctor Strange spellcasting CGI-level shit. I'd never experienced anything so intense, not even on full cups of ayahuasca. Cherub Rock by the Smashing Pumpkins transformed me into a Marvel Comics version of Shiva, whose dancing summoned galaxies into existence. Lady Gaga's Bad Romance had me romantically menaced by robotic crocodiles. And Soundgarden's Hands All Over showed me a mountain built of naked bodies writhing in sexual congress. Summited atop this orgy was Baphomet, the devil with the goat's head and legs and the spectacular human female breasts. All I could do was roll my eyes and laugh. Of course I'd bump into him here. The secret sauce. People tripped and danced. That wasn't anything new. Back in the 90s, I'd eaten mushrooms at fish shows and raved on ecstasy at warehouse parties. But nothing like this had ever happened. What was different now? For one thing, with each ceremony, I'd up my dosage. Now I was working with 6 grams of dried cubensis mushrooms, 20% over Terence McKennan's quote-unquote heroic dose, plus pot, plus the shamanic snuff known as rape, or hape, which can contain psychoactive ingredients like chacruna and toei. For another, I was keeping my eyes closed to really concentrate on what I saw in my visionary space. And lastly, I was working with songs chosen specifically because they expressed big, bold, obvious emotions like heartbreak and rage and devotion. Emotion, I came to realize, was the secret sauce that made available such a staggering variety of experience. Spotify became my grimoire. Every track it contained was a spell I could use to transform my consciousness. Like the hip Brits and Phonogram, I had learned to use music to do magic. I'd become a phonomancer. The first phonomantic playlist. Almost every weekend during that summer of 2017, I experimented with a wide variety of rock and pop music to see what kind of visionary effects I could get. Having determined that certain songs were more efficacious than others, I kept refining my playlist until by September, I had something very close to the version I would use going forward. It started out with some gentle, lilting love songs from the 60s. I tended to get nervous as the effects of the medicine first started to come on, and these helped soothe me a little. After that came the rock part, with wild, sorcerous, aggressive tracks that pumped me up and helped me push through when the anxiety started to get bad. Past a certain point, I would relax, so I scheduled a dance party with a bunch of pop songs that coincidentally all featured female vocalists. Often I imagined myself in a packed astral nightclub. Finally, things finished with an Anne Frank part, comprising the last 4 songs from Neutral Milk Hotel's 1998 album In the Aeroplane Over the Sea. It lasted a little over 3 hours. When it was over, I felt a sense of peaceful accomplishment, like I'd been through an ordeal and come out the other side reborn. I was having a blast, for sure, but there was also a real challenge to this work. Sometimes I felt like I was in way over my head. Beyond the usual time-space distortion freakouts was the suspicion I might be risking my mental health. Material was coming up that made me nervous. There was a spiritual aspect to the visions induced by this phonomancy stuff. That's putting it too lightly. There was a prophetic calling. I would have preferred to ignore it, but it wouldn't be denied. Time and again, I got hammered with the same message. The Divine Mother is returning to historical time. Prepare. Associated with that was a sense of apocalyptic climax. The future was either going to look like Star Trek: The Next Generation or The Road Warrior, and the moment that would decide our fate was now. Events were coming to a head. It was also wild and hilarious, but also bizarre and embarrassing. As the weeks went by and the weirdness got high, I wondered, what am I supposed to do with all this? And then one day, looking over my playlist, I realized something remarkable. The Hero's Journey. You've probably heard of The Hero's Journey. It was popularized by Joseph Campbell in his book The Hero with 1,000 Faces and the Bill Moyers TV show The Power of Myth. It's a pattern of events that seems to underlie many myths from around the world. As Campbell describes it, a hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. Depending on who you ask, the hero's journey has as few as 3 or as many as 22 stages. Here are 12 commonly recognized: the ordinary world, the call to adventure, meeting the mentor, the refusal of the call, crossing the threshold, tests, allies, and enemies, approaching the innermost cave, the ordeal, claiming the treasure, the road home, the emergence of the new self, returned with the boon. Not all stages appear in every story, nor do they necessarily occur in exact order. Each of these phases is an archetypal situation, and therefore has an associated, universally understandable emotion. The specific flavor of these emotions depends on the story being told, but they always follow a rise, fall, rise structure. Things are meh, then get interesting, then terrible, then turn out wonderful. George Lucas wrote the screenplay for Star Wars based on this structure, and it's become popular in Hollywood because it provides the blueprint for an emotional roller coaster ride that creates catharsis. WTF? What I realized as I was looking over my playlist was that if I considered each song in a given section, the masculine rocking part, the feminine dance part, even the Anne Frank part, as representing a particular aesthetic emotion, the sequencing, in terms of feeling tone, seemed to match the contour of the stages of the hero's journey. I hadn't intended anything of the sort, but once I saw the pattern, I couldn't unsee it. The real thing, Daddy-O. This arrangement seemed like synchronicity, which is a coincidence that strikes you as meaningful. Just a coincidence, a skeptic might say, but to the person experiencing it, a good strong synchronicity is mind-blowing. I was not prepared for this, but should have been. A lot of weird shit had happened during my phonomantic experiments. I made the mistake of telling some of it to a woman I was dating who was training to be a psychedelic therapist. She spent 2 hours trying to convince me I was having a psychotic break. To placate her, I went to see a licensed psychologist who specialized in spiritual emergencies and was evaluated. The verdict? Not psychotic. Whew! But something was going on, something non-rational. Contemplating a playlist that had been organized not by me, but by something working through me, I felt an otherworldly frisson. This was the unconscious at work. This was magic. Not comic book magic, like in Phonogram, but Gnostic magic, like in Jung's 7 Sermons of the Dead. The real thing, Daddy-O. Magic that threatened destruction and promised revelation. I'd opened my Wonka bar to find a gold foil ticket good for one extended visit to the Chapel Perilous. My superego waved its robotic arms and bellowed, "Danger, Will Robinson, danger!" My playlist wanted to know, was I in or was I out? I was in, way in, but I knew I needed to proceed with caution. I didn't want to wind up proving my concerned friend right. As any knowledgeable occultist will tell you, magic can be dangerous if you don't set up the proper safeguards to mark an enclosure to contain unleashed energies. I needed to organize my casual ceremony into a formal ceremony. It was time to put on my thinking cap. Sound design principles. I knew these 3 Hero's Journey sections of my playlist would be the ceremony's middle, the equivalent of the events in the Olympic Games. The opening was already there, although it would require a little tweaking. I wasn't sure what music I would use to close things down. That seemed less crucial. I'd figure it out eventually. The final thing I needed to complete the occultic transformation of my playlist was a clearer conception of what I was actually doing by engaging phonomantically with each set of songs. How could I understand them as ritual action, and by understanding, strengthen their efficacy? Ceremonial structure of the first phonomantic rite. Here's how I eventually organized my ceremony by content and purpose. Introduction. Creates an optimal setting. No songs, but several prayers for cleansing and blessing. Invocation of the Divine Mother. 3 delicate pieces of chamber pop meant to incite devotion to and invite the protection of the feminine aspect of the Godhead, the Holy Ma, thus helping to further establish a correct mind and heart set. Processional. 2 jams to serve as a warm-up for the physical and psychic exertions to follow. The StereoMyth. A rite of transformation. Lots of aggressive rock music, an opportunity to train various archetypes of masculinity. The Transcendental Disco, a rite of purification, lots of fun danceable pop, an opportunity to train various feminine archetypes. The Anne Frank working, a rite of atonement, 4 songs from Neutral Milk Hotel, the most solemn and sacred part of the ceremony. Recessional, a song to close the space and usher the participants back into the everyday world. A final and permanent selection was made after about 2 years of experimentation. Okay, but how did you... In hopes that understanding the way I approached putting together this phonomantic rite will help you as you think about creating your own, I'm going to provide detailed explanations for each of these sections in the pages to come. But first, remember when I mentioned magic several pages ago? I wasn't being metaphorical. Shortly after I first figured out the ceremonial structure of my nascent phonomantic rite, something happened that utterly transformed my understanding of what it was and what it could be. It was straight up motherfucking sorcery, and it happened like this. Teach me to do magic, David Bowie. I'm not sure where the idea came from. Possibly it was the YouTube video of a speech Grant Morrison, the famous comic book writer, gave at the 1999 Disinfo conference in New York City. In it, he evangelized the use of sigil magic for fun and profit. Sigils are symbols that encode a magical intent. To make one, first write out in sentence form the change you want to make happen in the world. I win $100 million in the lottery. Then cross out all the vowels and repeated consonants. The remaining letters you combine and alter to produce a witchy-looking symbol that encodes the original message. Morrison claimed that if you created a sigil and then charged the symbol with one of a variety of methods, it would impress itself on your personal unconscious, and from there go on to be planted in the universal mind as a seed that would grow into a new reality. In other words, your magical working would actually work. Grant was very effusive on this point. He swore sigil magic really did work. I decided, hey, what have I got to lose? I made a sigil. It stood for, Teach me to do magic, David Bowie. Why was that my intent? I honestly cannot remember. According to Morrison, the sigil could be charged in any number of ways. Bungee jumping, running around the block until you almost pass out, masturbating. I decided that during my next ceremony, I'd concentrate on a digital version of my design at the climactic moment of a song. A waking lucid dream. So that's what I did. Bowie's Moon Age Daydream fades out on a long, hypnotic guitar solo that seems to echo to every distant corner of the universe. Floating away on wave after wave of harmonic feedback, I fixed my gaze on the sigil displayed full screen on a 36-inch computer monitor. I stared until I closed my eyes and saw it still, lines blazing like ignited phosphorus, and then I saw something else altogether. It was clear as a lucid dream. I was performing on stage. Before me was a crowd dancing, maybe 150 people, all staring back. Only it wasn't me they were looking at. Their eyes were fixed on the 10-foot tall screen behind me, which was displaying my sigil. I was on mushrooms. Somehow I knew they were too, and like me were endeavoring to connect to David Bowie. Not the actual person, but what he'd come to represent in popular consciousness. The archetypal magician, the second card in the tarot deck. It was a party, but it was a class too, and I was leading it. Teach us to do magic, David Bowie. Then images inundated my mind. You remember that scene in The Matrix when Neo is sitting in the dentist's chair aboard the hovercraft Nebuchadnezzar, and he's downloading information through a jack in the back of his head, and suddenly he opens his eyes to look up at Morpheus and exclaim, "I know Kung Fu." It was like that. I saw phonomancy presented as theater, with stories and costumes and a light show and special effects. I witnessed jukebox musical dance parties staged in futuristic nightclubs by dozens, hundreds of people high on doses of the substantia, all singing and dancing and striving for a glimpse of the sacred. I saw tens of tripping thousands in a soccer stadium celebrating the divine with an extravaganza that was like a cross between Cirque du Soleil, an old-school Van Halen concert, and a Pink Floyd laser light show at the planetarium. Not as performers and audience, like members of a band. Everybody would have a role to play. Doing phonomancy together, we would create experiences far more intense and meaningful than we could ever realize on our own. Suddenly I realized I was frozen in place with both hands raised in the heavy metal horn salute. How long had I been standing like that? Rebel Rebel, the next track on the playlist after Moon Age Daydream, was almost over. Had post-lightning strike smoke been wafting from my head and shoulders, it wouldn't have surprised me. No Old Testament prophets surviving on locusts and honey out in the desert ever got a clearer message. Go make that show. Fuck a duck. I don't know what result I had been expecting from my sigil experiment, but it sure wasn't that. I liked to dance, but I wasn't what you'd call a dancer. Only the most charitable would describe the way I warbled as singing. I hadn't been in a play since my 5th grade class's production of The Year Without a Santa Claus. The very idea of walking on stage to perform while tripping filled me with stark terror. And really, how was I going to get other people to try something so weird? It seemed utterly impossible. Oi, little did I know. Part 4. Premises. The future is now. As noted earlier, using music to influence the psychedelic experience is not new. In the broadest sense, Leary's experiments with music as programming, and the song sung by Maria Sabina at the mushroom ceremony R. Gordon Wasson attended, and the Icaros that have been sung by ayahuasqueros for 1,000 years, and the praises of Kor chanted at Eleusis 2,000 years before the birth of Christ, and probably the cries and rattles that echoed through the caves at Lascaux another 30,000 years before that. All these could be considered examples of phonomancy, and that singing and sometimes dancing were combined with various substantia to create trance states that allowed access to non-ordinary reality. But in a more specific sense, phonomancy is an approach that could only happen now. Here are 7 premises that explain my current understanding of what phonomancy is, why it works, and where it might be going. Then we'll look at the technology that's made it possible. This will provide some necessary additional background as we move on to discussing how the phonomantic method's concepts can be applied. Premise 1. Music impacts the psychedelic experience in 2 ways, cymatically and affectively. Cymatics is the study of the visual representation of vibratory patterns. The classic cymatic experiment involves spreading flour on a glass plate and then attaching a tone generator. As the plate vibrates, the particles organize themselves into geometric patterns known as nodal lines of the vibration mode. When you change the frequency of the tone, the pattern changes. One night at an ayahuasca ceremony, I had an epiphany regarding cymatics and the psychedelic experience. I was sitting before the practitioner, who was singing an Icaro, a sacred song, to me. My eyes were open, but in the pitch darkness, I saw nothing, until the air before me began to shimmer with colors. Soon these resolved into a complicated, animated pattern that looked technological. With a start, I recognized it. It resembled the design stitched into a Shipibo textile I'd seen hanging on the wall of the Maloka earlier that day. I'd been told the textile represented the energetic signature of a certain plant, and now as the ayahuasquero sang a song that plant had taught him, its energy was manifesting before me. Holy smokes, I thought, his voice is cymatically vibrating my consciousness. It seems that musical tones can stimulate resonant vibration in one's field of consciousness, causing changes in the content of one's visionary space, which is to say, what is seen with open or closed eyes while under the influence of a psychedelic. In phonomancy, the cymatic effect is quite present, intensified by electronic amplification and the information density of the songs we work with. More on that in a bit. But mostly we're concerned with the music's affective impact. Affect is the psychological term for emotion, especially as influencing behavior or action. The second premise of phonomancy is based on affect. Premise 2. Every modern recorded popular song has been carefully engineered to create in its listener a specific emotional response. This response might be a certain flavor of heartbreak, as in Sinead O'Connor's Nothing Compares to You, a state of psyched up aggression, like Metallica's Fight Fire with Fire, or bittersweet nostalgia along the lines of Autumn Leaves by Frank Sinatra. This effect is accomplished via aesthetic choices regarding melody, harmony, timbre, and tempo, but also and especially through the lyrics. A song's lyrics tell a story. If the listener identifies at some level with that story, if it reminds them of an event from their own life, the song activates the latent complex of emotions constellated around that event. The listener feels those feelings again, that is, gets into it. Premise 3. By listening to lyric-based music while in a psychedelically altered state of consciousness, one can have an amplified experience of a song's target emotion. A study led by Dea Sigurd Stenbeck of the University of Copenhagen established that psilocybin increased the participants' reported emotional response to the music by an average of 60%. In the practice of phonomancy, this experience can be further intensified by dancing, which embodies emotion, and singing, which not only vibrates the body, but allows the subject to enter a state of identification with the song's story space that loosens the bonds of ego. Note that this premise contradicts received wisdom regarding the usage of music in psychedelic practice, namely that music with lyrics should be avoided because the words might impose a specific emotional response on the listener. With phonomancy, that's the whole point. A song's emotional content is not a cage, but a portal. Premise 4. By concentrating on this amplified target emotional state, a subject can influence the character and contents of her, his, or their closed-eye visuals, or CEV. In this book's introduction, I claimed that mushrooms respond to emotion. What I meant was, emotional arousal impacts both a subject's physiology, in terms of higher blood pressure, increased pulse, and etc., and psychology. When a person becomes emotionally aroused, any high-priority information that is perceived will be represented in attention and working memory more strongly. These impacts can intensify the psychedelic effects of psilocybin, especially the visual vividness and information density of the subject's CEV. Why this happens, I leave to the neuroscientists to figure out. For our purposes, it's fine that it's a black box. Premise 5. If, while in an altered state of consciousness, a subject can feel an emotion to a degree that passes a certain threshold of intensity, they are no longer feeling their personal emotion, but connecting to the collective human experience of that emotion, that is, its Jungian archetype. According to C.G. Jung, an archetype is a primordial image that exists eternally in the collective unconscious. Archetypes express themselves in myths, dreams, and everyday situations. They are the pieces of life itself, images that are integrally connected to the living individual by the bridge of the emotions. Different archetypes evoke different emotions. Different emotions invoke different archetypes. But archetypes are more than patterns of behavior. They are energetic currents within the divine mind. If you can establish a connection, energy will flow back to you, often in the form of inspired ideas and visions, but also physical sensations. That was the source of the uncanny electric charge flowing through me in my breakthrough with O Comely. I was plugged into the archetype of sorrow. With the phonomantic method, we train our ability to access archetypal energies via our emotions. Premise 6. Along with the psychic and somatic energies released by this archetypal activation, God forms can spontaneously emerge in one's visionary space. These may be identical to culturally established images of the divine or entirely novel. In this state, any spontaneously arising thoughts or images tend to be interpreted as direct communication from the goddess. These visionary phenomena are both noetic, meaning they have the weight of divine revelation, and numinous, meaning they convey a sense of the presence of a divinity. The psychologist Abraham Maslow referred to such events as peak experiences, rare, exciting, oceanic, deeply moving, exhilarating, elevating experiences that generate an advanced form of perceiving reality and are even mystical and magical in their effect upon the experimenter. He believed that the originating event of every known high religion was a peak experience, the private, lonely, personal illumination, revelation, or ecstasy of some acutely sensitive prophet or seer, and that peak experiences are one of the most important goals of life, as they are an indication of self-actualization. The phonomantic method refers to such experiences as gnosis, a Greek word commonly used to mean direct and immediate knowledge of the divine. Gnosis is the primary goal of phonomancy. Popular psionics. Psionics was a term popular in 1960s science fiction that referred to the use of electronics to amplify psychic abilities like clairvoyance and telekinesis. Sometimes I refer to the phonomantic method as popular psionics, or pop-psi for short, because it relies on a similar synergy of consciousness and technology. The following emergent properties of mass media help make that possible. Ubiquity. Historically, shamanic traditions lacked access to recorded music. While it can be argued that something, namely the social bonds created by group singing and other DIY music practices, was lost to our culture in the wake of the growing ubiquity of recorded virtuosic performance, vinyl records, radio, cassette tapes, CDs, and MTV helped to make music not only the most culturally influential art form of the 20th century, but spurred innovation and worldwide cross-pollination that hit the fast-forward button on music's evolution. In the wake of the emergence of these technologies, we now have access to more music in more styles, expressing more facets of experience than any human beings in history. Information density. Information density is the amount of information in a given space, whether that space is a framed painting, a physical room, or the grooves of a 45 RPM single. Multi-track recording and sound processing have allowed an unprecedented amount of information to be packed into a modern recorded song. This has a direct cymatic effect on consciousness. For instance, the producer Butch Vig has said that some tracks on the 1992 Smashing Pumpkins album Siamese Dream have as many as 100 guitar parts layered one atop the other. Most of these guitars were treated with distortion, adding extra harmonic overtones to those naturally occurring from a plucked string. When you combine that with drums that have gated reverb effects, doubled vocals, sub-bass frequencies, novel synthesizer patches, etc., what you have is music that impacts a mind in an altered state like rain falling on a pond. Every second, hundreds of thousands of droplets of data hit the surface of consciousness to create hundreds of thousands of ripples that crash into each other to create billions of interference patterns. It may be that it is the hypercomplexity of these interactions that helps give rise to the fantastically intense visions a song like Cherub Rock from the aforementioned album can induce when employed in an act of phonomancy. Electronic amplification. This cymatic impact is increased by the sheer vibrational force of the volume that can be created by electronic amplification. Phonomantic effects become more and more powerful the louder the music is played. Headphones can work, but in terms of stimulating visions, there's nothing like standing in the middle of 4 PA mains, getting blasted from all sides, and feeling your whole body vibrate in resonance. Again, this is the cymatic effect at work, at a level of physical stimulation no ayahuasquero chanting alone in the dark can match. Weaponized emotion. Weaponized is probably too strong a term, but much like mad scientists in New Jersey food labs spend their days trying to come up with new ways to make money off our genetically hardwired lust for salt, sugar, and fat, music producers have learned to create a product, the electronically recorded popular song, that hits us right in the feels, and consequently, the wallet. This has been accomplished through decades of experimentation, sheer serendipity, and perhaps not a small amount of divine providence. Since the 1930s, records have packed bigger and bigger payloads of emotion, all kinds of emotion. While Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries arguably has all the drama and aggression of Metallica's Master of Puppets, it's undeniable that music of the modern era is overall more personalized and therefore more emotionally accessible than any that has come before. There's just so much of it, and every song tells a story via its lyrics. And with so many stories available, it's that much easier to find one that really seems to relate to you and your situation, your current emotional environment. This quality of specificity, the reason why therapeutic psychedelic practice eschews songs with words, is exactly what makes popular lyric-based music so powerful in a phonomantic context. Virtually any archetypal emotion, portrayed in endless permutations of circumstance, can now be accessed through a well-chosen song. Premise 7. The experience of gnosis is personally transformative. A method for experiencing gnosis alongside others who are having a similar experience will be socially transformative. Putting the last establishing premise of the phonomantic method at the end of this section, separate from the rest, was not a mistake. The first 6 premises are based on observation. Premise 7 is almost entirely speculative. And yet it's the method's raison d'etre. Let me go out on a limb here. Ours is a civilization in crisis. No human beings ever in history have faced so many existential threats simultaneously, not the least of which is that our ability to even agree on what is real is degrading. We need a societal reboot, but at a level more fundamental than politics or economics. What's required is a spiritual renewal, a drastic one, a shift that can only come from a collective reorientation to transpersonal reality. We need to teach as many people as possible how to access this transpersonal reality with psychedelics. And we need to offer alongside that instruction an explanatory model for their experiences that promotes creative curiosity over dogma. That is, if and when on their journeys they see Jesus or Kali or the Archangel Gabriel, they need to understand that these are images spontaneously created by their unique imaginations to symbolically represent encounters with quite inconceivable energies. They are the truth, but not to be taken literally. Once people realize that not only is a mystical relationship with the divine possible and desirable, but that pursuing such a relationship alongside others is a force multiplier, group psychedelic practice could become the future of religion and possibly the Ariadne's thread that could lead our civilization out of its existential labyrinth. However, successful implementation will require two things: readily understandable activities that people can perform together, and a means to train up the self-control necessary to ensure their challenges won't become someone else's problem. There's a contemporary model for this, Santo Daime, the syncretic Brazilian Catholic ayahuasca church founded by Raimundo Irino Serra in the 1930s. In Santo Daime services, participants take the substantia, then sing hymns and do simple dance steps together. They have structured activities and standards for behavior. At this point, the cliché thing would be to describe the phonomantic method as Santo Daime on steroids. It's not. Potentially, at least, it's Santo Daime on the radiation from the gamma bomb explosion that created the Incredible Hulk. And in a way that's more literal than I like to admit, its goal is the creation of legions of self-actualized shamanic superheroes who will save the world. Religion is a verb. The word religion makes a lot of people uncomfortable. In that last section, I used it for the first time in this book, and it's going to start coming up more and more as we look at the phonomantic method's next stage of development, so I'd better explain what I mean by it. If spirituality is about your personal relationship to transcendent reality as you conceive it, religion is the way that people can work together to have a unique experience of transcendent reality that surpasses what they could achieve on their own. The way I use religion, it's less a noun than a verb. Part 5. Production. Entheotainment. Anyway, I did it. It took a couple years, but eventually I built a working prototype of what I'd seen in my vision. The First Church of David Bowie's Shamanic Cabaret is based on my 2017 Phonomantic Rite playlist. It can be trained alone or with friends, in private or in public. It can be a dance party held in your living room or elaborately staged as participatory theater designed to create a direct, immediate apprehension of the sacred. In the latter case, it's an entheotainment. Entheotainment is a new art form, but it's likely also the return of something very old. Its definition might describe the purpose and content of mystery traditions like the rites at Eleusis in ancient Greece. Expressed as a recipe, it might go like this. Ingest a substance that alters perception and heightens emotion. In the company of like-minded and like-intentioned others, engage with a story-based spectacle that pulls you into another world. Supported by the belief of everyone around you, experience this other world and everything it contains as real, up to and including the gods and goddesses themselves. Feel your understanding of yourself and the universe crack wide open. Emerge from that experience supercharged by energies both chthonic and celestial. Know you've been reborn. Return to the everyday world and find it similarly transformed. The concepts section described a third approach to psychedelic practice, the fitness class. Entheotainments are the gym where that workout takes place. The First Church of David Bowie's Shamanic Cabaret. I debuted a primitive version of the cabaret about 6 months after I got my marching orders. It was performed some 24 times in Seattle and Portland before the coronavirus epidemic shut things down, temporarily, inshallah, in January 2020. 5 years later, it's no longer just a playlist. It's now a full-blown jukebox musical, with vocal arrangements, choreography, costumes, narratives, music videos, dramatic tableau, a light show, and more. All very DIY, but again, prototype. It's important as proof of concept, but it's my expectation that once this concept is introduced and understood, much better entheotainments will be designed by people far more talented and well-financed than me. When I imagine what could be accomplished in this space with professional production values, my mind boggles. The creative and spiritual possibilities are endless. You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. Shamanic is the adjectival form of shamanism. Shamanism is mankind's oldest system for connecting with the transcendent reality that underlies our everyday world. Some say that only members of indigenous societies can make a legitimate claim to practice shamanism. Outsiders who adopt or adapt or otherwise imitate traditional practices are derided as plastic shamans or neo-shamans. But shamanism is not just for our brothers and sisters in the Peruvian jungle or the Siberian steppe. It's a universal human capacity. As I define it, shamanism is a set of techniques that allow you to access other levels of reality, deal with what you find there, and create change back here in the everyday world, whether that means summoning rain, healing someone's stomach ailments, or returning with transformational ideas. With proper preparation and progression, you can learn to actively bend the psychic and somatic energies psychedelics unleash toward realizing your own specific goals. In so doing, you are effectively training as a shaman. Phonomancy, the phonomantic method, and entheotainments constitute a stylish DIY entheogenic practice rooted in 20th century popular culture and powered by 21st century technology. Call it neon shamanism. Frame story. Back in the section on narrative, it was explained that the phonomantic method employs stories that amplify and anchor the impact of a psychedelic experience by placing it in nested imaginal contexts. The three liturgies of the cabaret, the StereoMyth, the Transcendental disco, and the Anne Frank working are all organized around narratives that explain the emotional target of each song in that part of the playlist. These stories are contained within a frame story that supports the entheotainment as a whole. In the cabaret's frame story, humanity is in grave danger. We face extinction, or at the very least, a collapse into unspeakable barbarism. The only way to prevent this is for individuals to recognize and integrate first their personal shadow, then the collective shadow. If enough of us do this work, we can avert catastrophe and take possession of our bright science-fictional future. The Anne Frank working is the means to do this collective shadow work. The earlier parts of the cabaret are preparation for this spiritually strenuous undertaking. Participation in the show is thus an attempt to save the world. ARG. A phonomantic rite can be understood as an alternate reality game, or ARG, in which a problem is identified, the direness of its threat established, and the participant invited to resolve the situation by overcoming challenges. The cabaret's frame story establishes the setting for this ARG. The degree to which participants can believe in the ARG while in ceremony has a tremendous influence on how much they get out of their phonomantic efforts. The degree to which they believe in the ARG outside of ceremony and use it as inspiration to train up the various capacities the cabaret requires is the key to the phonomantic method's efficacy as a vehicle for personal transformation. House cleaning. When performing the cabaret either as private phonomantic dance party or public entheotainment, the first order of business is securing the ceremonial space against unfriendly transpersonal influence. The rituals I created for this purpose are willfully syncretic, drawing from my ayahuasca experiences, my lapsed Catholicism, my undergrad studies in the psychology of religion, and science fiction. They're playful, but serious. Humorous, but it's not a joke. There's irony, but it's there for participants who might need it as shielding against the radioactivity of intense religious earnestness. Those already mutated by the gamma ray blast of full phonomantic initiation can soak up that energy and use it to reinforce their set. They know how to play the game. One important element of these preparations that I borrowed from Shipibo shamanism is the use of tobacco. The ayahuasqueros I've worked with regard the South American strain of tobacco called mapacho, scientific name Nicotina rustica, to be a master teacher plant. They use it to clear away bad energy and to act as a vessel for their intent. Wherever the ceremony is being held, I start by standing in front of the room's south wall with a lit mapacho cigarette in hand. I say, I bless and cleanse this space in the name of the Holy Ma, Ancient Pa the Horned One, Jesus Christ, the Archangel Michael, and the warrior spirits of my ancestors. I banish all resistance, all dark and heavy energy, all manipulative and exploitative entities. This is a safe space in which we may work, learn, and grow. Then I blow smoke. I repeat this ritual to all the walls and corners. Does it work? It works to the extent I believe it will work. I'll also say that at the very least it's better than nothing, or mechanically repeating a prayer from a tradition to which I don't belong, just because it seems more quote-unquote authentic. Adapt and overcome. Our culture is sadly without an intact shamanic tradition. Pake Santa Claus with your flying reindeer and your Amanita mushroom-inspired red and white suit. However, simply aping the practices of others won't fix that. As Bruce Lee said, we need to absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, add what is essentially our own. Feel free to adapt what's presented here for your own purposes, or develop your own rituals grown in the soil of your intellect and nourished by the love in your heart. Experiment, document, and contribute. You're bound to come up with something I might want to incorporate into my practice. Our collective efforts will eventually yield a tradition as rich and meaningful and efficacious as anyone's. Resistance. Formally invoking protection is extremely important. It's the very basis of workplace safety here, like tying your shoes or not smoking around oxygen tanks. Resistance is what we're defending against. Not resistance as in weight training's progressive resistance. Not exactly, anyway. Not resistance as the word is usually used in the psychedelic therapy space, meaning a subject's unwillingness to surrender control. In the phonomantic method, resistance with a capital R is a transpersonal force encountered in consciousness that opposes your skillful efforts to achieve your short and long-term objectives. It is a profound and terrible no. Often it comes on like this. You are hours into your journey. Things have been going well, but suddenly your head fills with ugly, perverse, violent images. You break into a cold sweat that soaks your shirt. You feel intensely nauseous, and your heart starts hammering hard enough to crack your sternum. You are being attacked. With enough practice, you can actually see your attackers. That is, your visionary imagination will generate a symbolic representation of the energies confronting you. I've been bullied by a gorilla in a business suit, luchadors in riveted iron masks, a Stalinist apartment building, an archon hurling thunderbolts, a slaver with a whip, sweat-suited townies from 1980s Massachusetts, and more. A rose by any other name. The term resistance is borrowed from the novelist Stephen Pressfield. In his book, The War of Art, he defines it as an engine of destruction that seeks to defeat human creativity in all domains. The Jungian analyst and storyteller Clarissa Pinkola Estes called it the natural predator of the psyche. My ayahuasquero buddy refers to the phenomenon as shaitana, a Shipibo word meaning spiritual witchcraft. It's been mythologized as the devil. You might prefer to interpret the phenomena as the emergence of negative emotional complexes. However you conceptualize it, if you do enough work with psychedelics, eventually you'll come up against resistance. Its effects can manifest as everything from silly Murphy's Law type mishaps to extreme physical discomfort to out-and-out psychedelic trauma. Start taking it seriously now and be better prepared when the inevitable blows start to fall. Resistance is only as dangerous as you are vulnerable, but if you're vulnerable, it will fuck you up. Forewarned is forearmed. Blessing and consuming the substantia. In the area where I live, possession of small amounts of psilocybin has been decriminalized, but for purposes of liability, the cabaret is BYOS, bring your own substantia. We do not distribute. It's understood that everyone is responsible for establishing what is for them the correct dose. No one is judged for going light, nor for going heavy, unless they are disruptive during ceremony. Disruptive individuals will be guided to the chill room. Once started, the show doesn't stop for anyone. Participants are asked to arrive an hour before the opening ritual. Once they are settled, they can bring their substantia to one of the celebrants, who will bless it using prayer and tobacco smoke. The prayer goes like this. Sacred substantia, thank you for sharing your medicine with us. Please take us into your world. Show us your skies and your seas, your mountains and your plains, your jungles and your deserts, and everyone and everything that lives there. Please help us make our hearts the portal through which we enter our experience today. Please help us to sing. Please help us to dance. Please help us to see. Please help us to heal ourselves. Please help us to learn to heal others. Please help us to be strong enough to hold the space. Please help us access magic so that we may incarnate the goddess in our consciousness. And please help strengthen our belief so that we may walk in the world as hot-blooded superconductors for the loving energies of the Holy Ma. Amen. Half an hour before the introduction, the cartoon The Dot and the Line, A Romance in Lower Mathematics, is played on video screens situated around the room. When it concludes, participants consume their dose as quiet songs from Stevie Nicks, Joni Mitchell, et al. Create a warm, feminine, contemplative atmosphere in the room. After about 20 minutes, the ceremony begins. Introduction. The ceremony proper starts when the lights go down. As the sound system plays the opening of David Bowie's song Heroes, video screens around the room flicker to life, and a pre-recorded message welcomes participants. This introduction explains the ritual can be various things depending on one's intent and experience: a raucous dance party, worship of the Divine Mother, psychic workout, therapy session, or any combination thereof. Then it offers a brief primer on the practice of phonomancy and how the ceremony is structured. Calling all angels. What comes next in the introduction, the invocation of the angels of the cardinal directions, is part of creating the correct set and setting for participants. Invoking the 4 archangels is a time-honored way to establish a protected space for a magical working. Being that the cabaret is self-consciously novel, rather than use a traditional prayer, I came up with my own. It doesn't matter that it's syncretic, idiosyncratic, neon shamanism. It's the intention with which a prayer is spoken that makes it effective. Michael, Sword of God, Divine Weapon of Transformation, please extend to us your protection as we labor tonight. Gabriel, Messenger of Divine Light, Machine of Loving Grace, please open in this space a high bandwidth channel between us and the mind of God. Uriel, Light of God's Wisdom, Engine of Transcendent Knowledge, please help us understand the information encoded in the blessings we receive tonight. Raphael, Medicine of God, Technologist of the Soul, please help us find here and now the healing we need so that we may rise tomorrow ecstatic to face the prospect of a new day. Gaia, Mother Earth, 4.5 billion-year-old spaceship, you are the source of our physical being. Your solid support provides us our grounding in space-time, and we need never fear becoming lost because we are always safe at home with you. To our extraterrestrial cousins in near-Earth orbit and those scattered through local interstellar space, we invoke your benevolent attention and offer a hearty, "Why don't you drop by sometime?" We aspire to be like you one day. Please help us use our experiences tonight to accelerate our evolution. As the participants and I follow along with the video and recite the invocation, we take ritual action, turning to face south to call in Michael, then west for Gabriel, north for Uriel, east for Raphael. We address the ground to call on Mother Earth and the ceiling to call in ET. When people perform these kinds of movements in unison, it helps to create the sense that we are now in a sacred space. Invocation of the Divine Mother. My initial phonomantic experiments had resulted in some intense visionary experiences of the goddess, and I wanted more. So when organizing my playlist into a formal ceremony, I decided to open things by consciously invoking her presence with 3 songs. Lady O by the Turtles, Explain by Jeremy Einek, and Mother of Love by the Velvet Teen. I called this section the Invocation of the Divine Mother. What these 3 songs have in common, besides being gentle and pretty, is that they evoke a feeling of romantic yearning. This emotional target is there in the plaintive melodies, but also, unmistakably, in the lyrics. Filtered through consciousness. When listening to these songs under normal conditions, I identify with the singer as he pines for the object of his affections. In this identification, I imagine myself singing to a woman. In this phonomantic context, however, the lyrics are reinterpreted. This is accomplished by allowing the songs to inspire a profane emotional response which is repurposed as sacred. Filtered through my consciousness, shaped by my intent, no longer is it a mortal female who is being addressed, but the feminine aspect of the Godhead, whom I call the Holy Ma. Transference isn't difficult. There's an erotic aspect to longing for the divine. These songs, then, are a way of fine-tuning set as we begin the ceremony. I want to get myself and participants in a state receptive to an experience of the divine feminine. If you get scared, sing. Terence McKenna once said regarding psychedelic journeys that go sideways, if you get scared, sing. The first song in this invocation, Lady O, was where that started for me. Despite my best efforts to create an optimal set and setting during one night of phonomantic experimentation back in July of 2017, I felt increasing anxiety as the effects of the substantia grew stronger. I tried meditative breathing. I tried willing myself to relax. Neither helped. Remembering McKenna's advice, when this song came on in my headphones, I began to quietly sing along. Not only did I immediately begin to feel better, something remarkable happened. My closed-eye visuals intensified, the colors became more saturated, and the geometric shapes more complex. This is pure speculation, but I believe that this was in part due to an enhancement of the cymatic effect described earlier. By singing along with the vocals on the recording, I created resonant vibrations in my torso and skull that intensified the psychedelics' impact on my consciousness. This impressed me so much that I immediately began learning to sing along to all the songs on the playlist. Over time, I came to realize that the cymatic effect was actually less potent than the way singing could amplify my emotional response to music, that is, contribute to the effective effect. Both effects are further strengthened by singing with others. Working out call and response vocal arrangements and singing in harmony are great ways to connect with other people, and the live voices layered atop the recorded music vastly increases the information density in the room. It awakens the spirit that dwells within the song. Luke, Veronica, and Pa Mercury. To help illustrate how singing and other practices from the phonomantic method are incorporated into a full-fledged entheatainment, I've included narrative descriptions of phonomancers at various levels working with specific songs. Our dramatis personae are Luke, who's a lawyer, his girlfriend Veronica, a college professor, and Pa Mercury, the lead phonomancer of the ceremony they are attending. The setting is the Debbie Harry Phonomantic Temple in Northampton, Massachusetts, on Saturday, March 26th, 2122. Lady O. The performance space constructed for the first Church of David Bowie's shamanic cabaret is a 6-sided discotheque 44 feet in diameter. In the corners are hexagonal stages 4 feet high and about 6 feet deep. Each is occupied by a phonomancer standing before a microphone under a single spotlight. In between these platforms, hanging from the 20-foot ceiling between the banks of lights and hologram projectors, are 12-foot wide OLED video monitors. There are 6 in total. On the floor is a honeycomb pattern drawn in glowing blue LED strips. Each of its 61 constituent hexagons is 4 feet in diameter, just enough space for a folding chair and room to dance. Seated in a hexagon 3 rows back from the north stage is Luke. Luke is a lawyer. His girlfriend Veronica is seated 1 row ahead to his left. A professor of American Popular Culture Studies at Smith College, she's been training at this gym cum theater school cum church, the Debbie Harry Phonomantic Temple, for almost 2 years. She is experienced with and knowledgeable about the cabaret. Tonight is Luke's first time attending. He takes some deep, slow breaths. He's beginning to feel that 3-gram dose of substantia he consumed 25 minutes ago. Some tension in his jaw and butterflies in his stomach, but it's not at all unpleasant. When finger-picked guitar arpeggios introduce the first song in the Invocation of the Divine Mother, Lady O, he grins in delight. Between the state-of-the-art sound system and the effects of the mushrooms, it's like he's hearing music for the first time. On the stage directly in front of Luke and Veronica, wearing the traditional costume of black shorts and black clerical shirt with a blue LED dog collar for a tab, is tonight's lead phonomancer, Pa Mercury. Along with the turtles he sings, "While you sit and seek, a crescent moon is laying at your feet, with hope that's made of sand. You don't think you can, but you have held it all in your hands." An image of the High Priestess from the Rider-Waite tarot deck appears on the video screens. She does indeed have at her feet a crescent moon, a traditional symbol of the goddess. In the symbolic language of the tarot, Luke knows, the High Priestess represents Isis, queen of the underworld of the unconscious. As the second verse begins, a string quartet enters to accompany the vocals. "I've been trying hard to keep from needing you, but from the start, my heart just rolled and flowed. I've seen where it goes, and still somehow my love for you grows." Luke pictures himself as the vocalist on the recording, singing to his sweetheart, and because he is deeply in love with his girlfriend Veronica, it's her he sees as this object of adoration. Thinking of her gives him a little thrill. He still can't quite believe he's found someone so amazing. As if in response, the luminous loops of delicate pastel color swirling in his head grow brighter and more complex. It's like a Kandinsky painting executed in heated, flowing lava lamp wax. Amazing. When the chorus arrives, all the rhythm phonomancers on their go-go platforms join in to layer harmonies atop the recording. So do many of the participants, including Veronica. Suddenly the room is ablaze with sound. "So on my heels I'll grow wings, gonna ride silver strings, but I'll see you in my holiest dreams, Lady O." The lyrics are up on the screens, the right word at the right time indicated by one of those old cartoon-style follow the bouncing ball animations. The thrill of all those voices together makes the hairs on Luke's arms stand up. After an instrumental interlude, the chorus comes round a second time, and wanting to contribute to the moment, Luke sings along. He thinks he's starting to get it. Looking at an image of the High Priestess, filtering the lyrics through his consciousness, charging them with thoughts of Veronica, he senses how this 1960s pop song about mundane romantic yearning can transform into a timeless hymn of sacred devotion. The singing is beautiful, and so are the lights, and the energy of the mushrooms is wonderful. Yes, definitely, he really does feel connected to something. Life? Nature? The goddess? Does it matter? He grins and shakes his head. He is filled with gratitude, and it unlocks the doors of heaven. Processional. When I started training the cabaret with other people, my friends pointed out that there was a big energetic gap between the lilting chamber pop of the Invocation of the Divine Mother and the first song of the rock part, which I would come to call the StereoMyth, wordplay on monomyth, Campbell's term for the hero's journey. This was the tweak the ceremony's opening required. I needed some tunes that could smoothly bring up the energy and the volume, hence this processional. It contains 2 songs, David Bowie's cover of the Velvet Underground's White Light, White Heat and Keep Yourself Alive by Queen. By the time these 2 tracks arrive in ceremony, the energy of the substantia is usually starting to come on strong. Some people will be getting antsy, others will feel dreamy lassitude. Either way, it's time to get up and dance. Cutting a rug. At first, I danced to deal with nervous system arousal. It took a while for me to understand that it was also an excellent way to embody the emotions conveyed by the songs I was listening to, the emotions I was endeavoring to feel. Also very important, dancing is a way to feel connected to those around you. Moving in time with others is an age-old technique for generating group cohesion. Later, as my dosages increased and I started adding harmaline to the mix, which can cause a very strong urge to lie down and dream, dancing became a task-based stressor. It was something I had to do, even if I didn't want to, even if it felt like I was trying to dance while wearing a 40-pound weight vest. The ability to self-overcome is essential for using the phonomantic method to realize virtuosity. It's a lesson most easily learned first in the body. Swagger as set. Although important, dancing actually plays a supporting role in terms of the experience to be obtained from the processional. As in the Invocation of the Divine Mother, the primary task is entering into the emotional space of the songs. In this section, though, the target emotion isn't how the singer feels about something or someone, but how it feels to be him or her or them. With White Light, White Heat, you imagine yourself as David Bowie in his Ziggy Stardust years, fey, facile, glamorous like fairy dust. With Keep Yourself Alive, you try to be Freddie Mercury yowling braggadocio through his mustache. This isn't as weird as it sounds. It's something we all do unconsciously when we're singing along to a favorite song in the car or in our bedroom jamming air guitar. We pretend to be the vocalist or instrumentalist we're listening to, so we can feel, just a little, how amazing it must be to be them as they demonstrate such wildness, such power, such grace. In the processional, we're doing this intentionally to further refine our set. As we head into the StereoMyth, an extra bit of swaggering confidence will be a big help. Music videos. One of the final additions to the cabaret, and the one that's had the most wide-ranging effects, was the inclusion of custom-made music videos for every song. Music and image can be combined to hypnotic effect. Ask anyone old enough to remember MTV how many hours they would sit entranced by an endless string of mini-movies from The Police, Duran Duran, John Cougar Mellencamp, Madonna, et al. The phonomantic combination of music, image, intentional emotion, and substantia can create astonishingly powerful experiences, like a cross between the Ludovico technique from Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange and the super soldier creation process from the film Captain America, The First Avenger. Along with sigils and images pertaining to relevant archetypes, the processional's music videos feature performance footage of Bowie and Mercury in their prime. Any participant who's ever loved them feels a real thrill when they show up on screen. Even decades later, they're just so fucking cool. Such galvanizing moments place the kindling that'll help spirits catch fire later. White Light, White Heat. An electric guitar has begun to chime insistent eighth notes. In the lower left corner of the black video screens, there appears a white chyron listing the artist, the song title, the album it was from, and the record label that released it. If Veronica hadn't been a scholar of 20th century pop culture, she probably wouldn't have caught the chyron's symbolic meaning. More than just information, it was like a little Easter egg planted in a movie or a video game. In his phonomantic music videos, Manseau had recreated the way songs were identified on MTV, a cable television channel that in his youth had broadcast videos 24 hours a day. The bass drum is thumping. Now the guitar roars power chords. Veronica stamps her right heel in time. While sitting through the invocation of the Divine Mother, she has grown restless. Working with 4.5 grams today, she needs to do something with the energy building within, and she isn't the only one. As Paul Mercury and David Bowie launch into the first verse of White Light, White Heat, the crowd of participants explodes into motion. Everyone is dancing. White light gonna drive me out of my brain, Paul Mercury chants. White light gonna make me feel so insane. White heat shaping me down to my toes. White light could kill me now, goodness knows. With the rest of the crowd, Veronica joins in on the white lights and white heats that initiate each line. On one level, it's antiphonal, an interaction between a priest and his congregation, but it's also the call and response of a band leader and his musicians. In this cooperation, she finds deep joy. Just as she's stimulated by the excitement of the people around her, they are feeling her excitement, and together they are amplifying that arousal by expressing it with mutually agreed upon sounds organized by pitch and timing. This was how cavemen created social cohesion, but it isn't primitive, it's primal. As exultant as the atmosphere is, there's discipline too. The guy in front of Veronica to her left is hopping from foot to foot on a 4 count. The woman to her right is executing a sharp little James Brown shuffle, and someone further over is doing wrist circles with their arms lofted overhead. But despite their vigorous movements, nobody violates the boundary defined by their hexagons, which still glow on the floor, albeit dimly. For this, Veronica feels gratitude. She'll have enough to deal with this afternoon without worrying about other people moshing into her. At the chorus, everyone sings, "Oh, oh, 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 white light." During the second verse, Veronica studies the sigil projected on screens around the room, the one that had triggered Manseau's prophetic awakening. The bottom third is built off a stylized M and looks like the conical bustier worn by 80s Chanteuse Madonna. It also reminds Veronica of Dr. Frank N. Furter from the 1975 film The Rocky Horror Picture Show. This reading is reinforced by the middle section, which resembles a pair of lips with a drop of blood dribbling down. Topping the sigil is a backwards S drawn in right angles. This feature has drawn criticism over the years because it's similar to the vertical part of a swastika. Manseau had acknowledged this, but controversially maintained that this was part of the image's magical potential. "It's got a whiff of fascism," he said in a 2025 interview with Rolling Stone. "It feels a little evil, but that's why it belongs there. Fascism isn't dead, it's just in our society's shadow. Ignoring it isn't going to make it go away. Just like the contents of our personal shadow, it must be owned and integrated. It's a useful, unnecessary source of power that we draw on to do our sacred work." When the guitar solo begins, first quoting Chuck Berry's Johnny B. Good, then segueing into some glam rock razzle-dazzle, the video cuts to footage of Bowie performing live. It was taken from a concert film entitled Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. Mick Ronson, the Spiders' lead guitarist, is throttling his Les Paul, while Bowie rubs up against him like a cat on a scratching post. This makes Veronica think of Luke. She looks back to find him turned to face her. He's dancing with his eyes closed, a blissed-out smile on his face. When Ronson goes into some high notes that seem to loop forever, Luke's expression becomes that of someone experiencing excruciating delight. That makes Veronica laugh, until she realizes she too is probably making that face, and then she laughs harder. Her emotional sensitivity dial feels like it's been cranked way past 11, and the steely screeching of the guitar is striking bright sparks of joy from the flint of her brain. Now Luke is grinning at her. She grins back. Then he flashes the phonomancer salute she taught him, right arm crossing his chest so he can tap his left shoulder, then pulling his right hand back to point toward the ceiling, finishing with the index and pinky extended heavy metal horns. Together, to the stars, forever, fuck yeah. Veronica bursts out laughing again and returns it. They dance together through the next chorus. After that comes the outro guitar solo, with Bowie scatting over the top. "What's that sound? What's that sound? Don't you know if you're dead or alive?" Then the guitar squalls for 4 more measures, and then David Bowie and Paul Mercury cry in unison, "Here she comes!" There's a tremendous crack of thunder. Lights around the dance floor go nova, and now everything is blinding white like the heart of the sun. Out of the brilliance emerges a holographic image of Guan Yin, the Chinese Buddhist goddess of mercy. Her eyes are closed in meditative repose, her right hand lifted in the traditional mudra of fear not. But as they all sing, "Oh, oh, 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 oh," on a descending scale, she comes alive to offer them the slightest, sweetest of smiles and a conspiratorial wink as she tucks her ring and middle fingers under her thumb and extends index and pinky. The noise had startled Veronica, and now, gazing up at Guanyin, she is seized by giddy awe, spiked with a little terror. They had done it. They had invoked her. The goddess is here. Then the moment passes, and she is returned to herself. An analytic aspect of her personality asserts, quite reasonably, that she had fallen for theatrical legerdemain, that the noise and flash and the animated hologram, special effects she hadn't expected, it must be a new addition since her last ceremony, had temporarily overwhelmed her already hyper-aroused nervous system into perceiving something miraculous. Veronica isn't having it. She makes a conscious decision to believe in the reality of what has just happened, which is to say, her experience of its meaning. The core of her being is still vibrating like a struck tuning fork. That's all the evidence she needs. She's caught a glimpse of the goddess, and with any luck, there'll be more to follow. Around her, some people are still dancing. Others mirror Pa Mercury and the rhythm phonomancers, who are posed with hips cocked, heads down, elbows tucked into their sides, hands raised in the traditional mudra of fuck yeah. They all wail ma, ah, 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 ah. There's a final rat-a-tat drum fill, a final crashing power chord, and then white light, white heat is over. As the crowd roars on the record and in the temple, all the stage lights wink out, and then the next narrative video begins to play. Amor Fati. Several ritual actions in the cabaret involve the hand gesture colloquially known as the devil horns or the heavy metal sign. In the cabaret, we adopt and adapt it to indicate an endorsement of the divine will, not just when it brings us pleasure and joy, but pain and challenge as well. This is similar to Nietzsche's concept of amor fati, love of one's fate. Adopting this attitude is strategic in the context of the cabaret ARG. By throwing the horns with wild child heavy metal parking lot energy, we ardently affirm our belief in the goddess and the ultimate goodness of her obscure plan that governs our lives. We say yes to it all, with a gesture that even looks like the letter Y, and remind each other to remain stalwart in the face of the no that is resistance. Tertiary process. After Veronica felt giddy awe spiked with a little terror that left her vibrating like a struck tuning fork, she made a conscious decision not to dismiss it as a reaction to external environmental stimuli. Overriding her own rationalist objections, she accepted her experience as a flash of the numinous, the holy astonishment one feels when there's been an eruption into the everyday by a capital M mystery that is eternal. By her lights, she had sensed the presence of the goddess. This represents what might be called tertiary process thinking. Sigmund Freud postulated two modes of cognition, primary and secondary process. Primary process thought is an attempt by the id to impose itself on the world via wishing. Magical thinking, the belief that one's thoughts can influence the material world despite a lack of causal linkage, is a form of primary process thought. Secondary process thinking is when the ego has adapted to reality and knows that wishful thoughts change nothing on their own. Tertiary process thought is when you reframe an experience to make it mean whatever you want. Magical consciousness, the way in which the cognitive architecture of a mind engages the emotions and imagination in a pattern of meanings related to experiences, is a form of tertiary process thought. There's another term for this, religious belief. Tertiary process thinking expands the range of experiences that are available to you, in ceremony and out. With hard work, sufficient dosage, and grace, it can lead to a flow state in which effortful belief is no longer necessary because you've entered a new reality and you know. We'll see a dramatic example of this in just a bit. Extempore. The first time I invited friends down to try out this crazy ritual I'd made up, we ran into a problem. I'd been working with my playlist for 6 months. I knew that I was using music to experience aesthetic emotions. I had established specifically what emotion or complex of emotions I was trying to derive from each song, but I had neglected to explain any of that to my friends. Whoops. We'd taken mushrooms and were dancing and having a fine time. When we got to the StereoMyth, I realized that without me explicitly saying something awkward before each song, like, now I want you to try to feel esprit de corps, like you're with a gang of tough kids that you're proud to call friends. They had no way of knowing what the target emotions were. We wouldn't be able to get on the same page. So I improvised. On the spot, high on 5 grams of psilocybe cubensis, I made up a story. It started like this. Your name is Ged. You're 22 years old, you live in Erie, Pennsylvania, and you're starting to think you've made some bad decisions in life. I kept going until I got to a point in the story where the protagonist, with whom my friends were supposed to identify, which is why I was telling it in second person, was in an emotional place that resonated with what was next on the playlist. In this first chapter, Ged, who's driving home after suffering a romantic disappointment, hears a song on his car radio. It had been one of his late dad's favorites, so he cranks it up and starts singing along. As he does, he starts to feel better. It's like he's once again living in that happier time. That feeling, I told my friends, sounds a lot like this song. And then I played Rush's The Spirit of Radio, an AOR staple that practically demands you hold up a lighter during the chorus, which we actually do as a ritual action. I managed to keep it going, extemporizing chapter after chapter. Each helped to indicate the next song's target emotion. After we got through the StereoMyth, I did it for the Transcendental disco. And somehow, with just a little bit of polish, those seat-of-the-pants spiels became the narrative structures for the whole ceremony. The StereoMyth. The StereoMyth is a rite of transformation built around 11 AOR rock, alternative, and heavy metal tracks from the 1970s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Working with the StereoMyth is an opportunity to hone your visionary skill by employing its 6 sub-skills: courage, clarity, self-control, self-overcoming, anti-fragility, and emotional flexibility in a challenging external environment. You can also do the psychological work of imaginally inhabiting a variety of masculine archetypes. Structure, stress, and skill in the StereoMyth. As a rite of transformation, this section of the ceremony is intended to bring participants from one mental state, tension, to another, relaxation, via catharsis. For some, this may be less a result of sequencing of target emotions than sheer relief it's over. The StereoMyth includes some of the strongest external stressors in the cabaret. The music is played at nightclub volume. Some of it is aggressive. The videos incorporate images that may unsettle. At several points, the lead phonomancer's performance includes costumes, dramatic tableau, and special effects specifically designed to inspire mild fear or at least surprise. For novice phonomantic trainees, what courage and self-control they have will be challenged as they regulate their response to these stimuli. With experience and increased skill, though, they'll come to relish them. Their anti-fragility will kick in, and the stimuli will be experienced as thrills rather than stressors. Those caveats aside, it's really an exhilarating experience. Once participants have completed the approaching the inmost cave and ordeal stages, each subsequent song lifts the mood until the StereoMyth concludes on a note of ecstatic communal joy. A rite of transformation. When you begin the StereoMyth, you're not turning off your mind to relax and float downstream. It's not that you are resisting the visionary effects of the substantia. You're eager to journey. You are, however, refusing to give in to the disordered thinking it can cause. You're imposing your will on the psychedelic rather than simply going with the flow. As you gain experience and your dosages increase into the superheroic, the additional psychic load makes staying lucid even more challenging. Under such conditions, maintaining cogitative organization can deplete your mental and physical resources. If effort becomes strain, strain becomes drudgery, and drudgery turns into misery, it might start to seem like you've bought a one-way ticket to Bad Tripistan. But if you persist, making your way through the innermost cave and the ordeal, through the reward and the return, and on to the emergence of the new self, eventually something amazing can happen. Your faith and hard work may open a door into the spirit world through which you can pass with clarity and tact. Earlier, we called it catharsis. It's a kind of breaking through. In phonomantic catharsis, Maya is replaced by belief space. Maya, in the sense I'm using the term, is mundane reality, specifically the sense that the mundane is the only reality. Belief space is a state of consciousness in which the goddess is the self-evident, encompassing reality. Suddenly, you're no longer struggling to find the strength to continue. Spiritual sluices open to flood you with energy that can be effortlessly directed to achieve your desired goals. The strain of laboring under the psychic load of a heavy dose becomes a flow state powered by wild magic. You've transformed into your shamanic superhero self. This is a real, undeniable phase shift in your subjective experience that can take place when performing phonomancy. It's real in that when it doesn't happen, at the end of a session, you are utterly debilitated. But when it does, you are supercharged. That feeling can last for days. Kidnapped by Ziggy Christ. Here's the StereoMyth story in brief. You are a young man working a dead-end job and you're worried you're going to be trapped in your hometown forever. One night driving home, your car breaks down. In the middle of a country road, you are confronted by an 8-foot-tall, purple lame jumpsuit-clad stranger with a magenta mullet. He says his name is Ziggy Christ and that he is the herald of the Holy Ma. He claims that your civilization is in mortal danger. Only you can save it. Abducting you aboard his triangular starship, he transports you 400 light years to a planet in the Electra system of the Pleiades. There, he tells you, you'll find what you need to save the world. Then, without bothering to explain what exactly that is, he abandons you. But before he goes, he gives you a 1980s-style Sony Walkman. He's made you a mixtape. He says, use it only in case of emergencies. One comes up almost immediately when an alien jungle beast attempts to eat you. When you hit play, the music magically conjures a superhero figure who reminds you of Marvel's Wolverine, only he's wearing an Iron Man-ish suit of nanotech armor. He fends off the beast, then disappears when the song is over. As you resume your quest, you feel safer knowing you can summon him anytime you have need. Eventually, you stumble across a cave that turns out to be an access tunnel into an ancient underground alien city. Your way is blocked by the embodiment of your own Jungian shadow. When you try to use your magic Walkman this time, though, no superhero arrives. Bravely, you engage the shadow anyway. When the struggle is over, you find you are wearing the nano armor. You keep heading down. Finally, at the very bottom of this alien underworld, you find yourself in a vast arena. There you battle the devil, resistance, the very principle of no itself, with the lives of everyone you love hanging in the balance. You triumph, then collect 2 prizes. The first is the knowledge you have a soul who now speaks and counsels you directly. The second is a mission in life, which is to return to Earth and teach everyone how to use music to make magic and gain awareness of their souls. After an arduous traversal back through the alien jungle, you find Ziggy right where he left you. However, he doesn't have his ship with him. How is he going to take you home? He explains you no longer need a spaceship, that you and your soul form an artifact of spiritual technology that channels the self, that is, the child aspect of the Trinitarian Godhead. As the self, you are a sphere whose center is everywhere and circumference is nowhere. You can be wherever you want. You travel the 400 light years back to Earth in an instant. Once again, you are behind the wheel of your car, which is now running fine. Now that you're home, you resolve to take on the problems of your everyday life with ferocious joy and find a way to help the world benefit from the boons you've won. StereoMyth playlist. Here's a chart of how the stages of the hero's journey, the target emotions and associated archetypes, and the songs chosen to evoke them in the StereoMyth all interrelate. Details regarding how to engage with each of these songs is outside of the scope of this book. If you're curious, please check out my book, Spotify the Gnostics, Here's the First Church of David Bowie, which has extensive explanations of ritual actions and visualization exercises for all songs in the cabaret. Participation mystique. During the ceremony, trainees are asked to pay attention, follow the story, and do their best to identify with the protagonist. It's no different than what you do when you watch a movie or read a novel. Among Jungians, writes Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, this is called participation mystique, and it is used to mean a relationship wherein a person cannot distinguish themselves as separate from the thing they behold. Among Freudians, it's called projective identification. Among anthropologists, it is sometimes called sympathetic magic. All these terms mean the ability of the mind to step away from its ego for a time and merge with another reality, that is, another way of comprehending, another way of understanding. This process synergizes remarkably well with the psychedelic state. The substantia extends one's imaginative and empathetic capacities, allowing the phonomantic narratives and the ideas they convey to make a greater impact. The power of rock. There's something about the sound of distorted electric guitars that stimulates those areas of the testosterone-addled teenage brain concerned with aggression and mating, which for primates seeking status in their social groups are inextricably intertwined. This was recognized as early as 1958 when authorities banned Link Wray's Rumble, an instrumental record, because it was believed his menacing riffs could incite juvenile delinquency and teen pregnancy. The glorious phonomantic effectiveness of rock music is based on that cymatic effect, coupled with the effective fact that more than any other popular music genre, hard rock and heavy metal draw on heroic myths and legends for lyrical inspiration. These tales can be understood as ancestral memories from a time when a man's contribution to his tribe's survival involved imposing his will on the local environment via wisdom, cunning, and/or brute force. In other words, they describe masculine archetypes. When pioneers of the heavy like Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, and Queen married the roar of a Les Paul through a Marshall stack to stories about warriors and wizards and dragons, their music tapped into that atavistic energy. Later bands like Jane's Addiction, Tool, and Mastodon eschewed the Tolkien allusions in favor of Jung and Melville references, but ultimately delivered the same product, myths told at jet engine volume. Power fantasies, which is exactly what the male adolescent psyche has craved since time immemorial, whether he's preparing to go on his first auroch hunt with the men from his clan or brave the first day of high school. Here's what I wrote in another book about my first exposure at age 14 to Swedish neoclassical metal guitarist Yngwie Malmsteen. The music was exotic, sinuous, snarling, practically Wagnerian in its drama. Yngwie's playing had a devil-take-the-hindmost virtuosity and cranked up loud as fuck, with my dad upstairs yelling, "Turn that noise down!" It spoke of power. Wolverine, adamantium-clawed berserker rage power. Thomas Covenant, the white gold wielder, wild magic power. Luke Skywalker, Jedi telekinesis, lightsaber power. While the song played, I was the hero of an epic far more dramatic and meaningful than my own life. For 5 minutes and 15 seconds, I was a demigod. No matter how old we are or what gender we identify as, we all have inside of us a 14-year-old boy still capable of such fantastic emotions felt with such febrile intensity. For some of us, accessing that inner youth will be a return to a stage of our conscious childhood. For others, you'll need to get an imaginative touch with your contrasexual unconscious personality, your Jungian animus. Either way, that aspect of your psyche is a spigot tapped into a vast reservoir of ferocious vitality. The StereoMyth playlist chart associates an archetype with each target emotion. This suggests a psychospiritual exercise. By applying your inner male adolescent's libido to the StereoMyth, you can use the power of rock to fuel your imaginative attempts to either be or engage with the archetypes of the fool, the mentor, the explorer, the soldier, the shadow, the devil, the anima, the sorcerer, the hunter, the self, and the hero. Each time you practice quote-unquote living an archetype while under the influences of the substantia, you'll summon visionary content from your unconscious. Working with these images and ideas outside of ceremony allows you to integrate archetypal energy into your conscious personality. It's my contention that the StereoMyth's masculine archetype training can expedite the process of individuation, particularly for those primarily feminine-identified people who may find fantasies of superpowered martial glory to be terra incognita. Later, we'll see how the masculine-identified can progress their individuation by working with feminine archetypes in the Transcendental disco. 46-2. Pa Mercury is not terrified. He gets down on his hands and knees. He adjusts the single eye hole cut into his costume, a head-to-toe black bodysuit, so he can see through the opening in the curtain behind his stage. The narrative video is playing on the movie screens arrayed around the temple. Here's your shadow now, standing before you in this cramped tunnel, a man-sized hole in the world blocking your way. You move right, it moves right. You juke left, it jukes left. There's no getting past it. It says nothing, makes no threatening moves, but still it fills you with a fear greater than any you have ever known. Pa Mercury is not terrified, but his body is. His stomach is clenched, his chest is tight, his limbs feel weak. And what he's seeing in his head is unsettling and incoherent. Slaughtered sheep, a human corpse, and a shower stall. No, not terrified, but he is feeling a little grim. Resistance is upon him. The symptoms have been showing up in ceremony for the last few months. Images of vermin and insects superimposed over his visions. Difficulty accessing the energy of the substantia. Sudden, powerful feelings of alienation, futility, and despair. Sometimes these are so strong he can barely get through his assigned tasks. He's resigned to the possibility this might be one of those times. That's the gig, he thinks. He takes cold comfort from the fact that every phonomancer goes through this at some point. Learning to overcome resistance is a necessary stage in one's development. You hit play on Ziggy's Magic Walkman, says the narrator. But now a different song begins, a bass guitar thudding menacingly, a voice chanting, Join in, my child. You wait, but your superhero bodyguard, the guy with the claws and the horns, doesn't appear. You realize you're on your own. That's when you start to panic. You are gazing into the abyss, and it's looking right back at you. It's too much. You can't bear it. The urge to turn and run is overwhelming, but you know in your heart that if you're going to save the world, there's only one way to go, straight into the shadow. That's Pa Mercury's cue. He pushes through the curtains. The only light in the temple is from the exit sign above the doors and back. As he crawls out onto his Persian rug-covered platform, theatrically diabolical laughter bounces from speaker to speaker. It's a sample added to the track, the introduction to a radio serial from the 1930s. What evil lurks in the hearts of men, announcer John Archer croons. The shadow knows. As if in response, a bass line begins churning, so loud it vibrates the stage. A guitar creeps through a triad of notes in palm-muted counterpoint. Casting about with his exposed eye, Pa Mercury finds the spike, a white duct tape cross that marks the location for him to begin and end this song. Once over it, he rolls himself uptight on the floor, chin tucked to his knees in balasana, yoga's child pose. He is a black egg waiting to hatch. Join in, a voice whispers on the recording. Pa Mercury mutters the words in tandem. Join in, my child, and listen. I'm digging through my own numb shadow. Black egg, black seed. Now he rises writhing from the floor, a black vine reaching for a black sun. The introduction crescendos. At the climax, Pa Mercury hits the first of his choreographed poses. When the red spotlight snaps on behind him, he stands silhouetted before the participants, his body a twisted old tree with dead limbs swaying in a cold wind. Slowly and methodically, he shifts into new configurations. A corpse caught in barbed wire, a child shielding her eyes from a nuclear flash. His performance feels forced, ungainly, self-conscious. There's no flow. He's not connecting with spirit. Now he's barely seeing closed-eye visuals. The only evidence he's tripping on a 6-gram ayahuasca dose is the effort it's taking to maintain clarity. It's like a psychic Death Star is trying to tractor beam his thoughts away from his intent. Along with Tool vocalist Maynard James Keenan, Pa Mercury croons, my shadow's shedding skin. I've been picking scabs again. I'm down, digging through my old muscles, looking for a clue. Despite his discomfort, he begins the inquiry, the psychological task this working calls for. He attempts to contact the shadow aspect of his psyche. Show me, he thinks. Show me what I don't want to know about myself. If things were going well, when he closes his eyes, he would find incidents and images that contradict his idea of himself. Racist thoughts he's had, women whose affection he's exploited for sexual gratification, his father's academic superciliousness, which Mercury inherited and has never quite overcome. If things were going well, he would face these things, own them. The grinding shame would release psychic energy, and then he'd have the subjective experience of doing sorcery with it, feeling louche and wicked. I've been crawling on my belly, clearing out what could have been. I've been wallowing in my own confused and insecure delusions. He sees nothing. The magic isn't working, and the fear is growing, but he mustn't quit. The participants are depending on him to lead them through this exercise. He keeps singing and dancing. For a piece to cross me over, or a word to guide me in. I want to feel the changes coming down. I want to know what I've been hiding. The shadow is the repressed part of one's psyche, the unacknowledged, ignored, and disavowed. Societies have shadows too, and there's a transpersonal aspect to it as well, the shadow of the divine. This ultimate aspect is an infinite battery of wild-ass, terrifying energy which you can, if you are lucky, daring, and disciplined enough, tap into to use for your own purposes. Approaching it entails real risk though. Entities who exist up the dimensional food chain are always lurking in proximity, ready to snatch up the unwary and gobble them down. Pa Mercury is not unwary. He's been through this before, but anyone who ventures at night into the forest primeval, no matter how skilled in battle, is taking a chance. This time he may have crossed paths with something he cannot handle. Time to stop now, an icy whisper in his head. Time to stop. Time to stop. It's getting harder and harder to keep dancing. It's like steel cables have been looped over his neck and are now towing him to the ground. He can't see them, but he can feel them. On the recording, Maynard's voice jumps up an octave into an enraged shout for the chorus. My shadow, change is coming through my shadow. My shadow, shedding skin, I've been picking my scabs again. Pa Mercury can't match him. He can barely raise his voice. Something is seriously wrong. He's suddenly drenched in cold sweat. Vomiting inside his shadow costume is an acute possibility. Instaflu, his friend Ma Artemis calls this state. It's indicative of demonic attack. I love how much this sucks, he thinks, but he doesn't. It sucks how much this sucks, and it's getting worse by the second. He has to sing the next verse stock still. It's all he can do to remain standing. The muscles and tendons in his neck and back are creaking under the strain of defying those invisible cables, which are indeed steely, also somehow fibrous and sticky. You will obey. You will stop. You will obey. But he won't. He's going to keep going. Except, maybe he can. Nobody could keep going under this onslaught. He goes down on his elbows and knees, trying to make it look choreographed, probably failing. He can smell dust, the Persian rug an inch below his nose. The nausea is becoming unbearable, the need to escape psychotically intense. All he wants is to crawl off stage, then crawl out of his costume, then crawl out of his skin. This is it. Psychedelic catastrophe, utter humiliation. He never wants to do this again. But then through his monitor, he hears the voices of his rhythm phonomancers shouting the chorus as it comes round. My shadow, change is coming. Now is my time. He's not alone in this. They know him. They believe in him. And he believes in what they're trying to achieve together. He believes. Get up, he thinks. They're depending on you. Get up. They are his why. With that, he can bear any how. The how is in the music. Apocalyptic guitars, sinewy bass, drums that could register on a seismograph. Most of all, Maynard's fierce singing. Pa Mercury loves this song. Remembering that seems to throw a switch in some archaic part of his brain. The indomitable warrior aspect of his personality activates. Slowly, painfully, he climbs back to his feet. Estimating when the song's bridge will arrive, he takes a moment to gather himself. Then, with all the force his well-trained muscles can generate, with all the passion he can find in his heart, he lunges into Vibrahadasana pose, hands throwing the horns. He howls the lyrics, not caring that he is standing nowhere near his microphone. It doesn't matter if the participants can hear him. They just need to feel him meaning it. I choose to live and to lie, kill and give and to die, learn and love and to do what it takes to step through. And then finally, the medicine starts to work for him. As a stuttering, flanging drum solo begins to build, in his mind's eye he sees a ragged yard in nighttime, fenced with black iron, tombstones overgrown with weeds, everything covered in an eerie green glow. Now he is sinking into the ground, passing through geological epochs, layer by sedimentary layer, disturbing the rest of the long dead. Now he is spilling into a tunnel that opens into a cavern that is a cathedral. Now on the chancel is an inhumanly tall alabaster-skinned woman in a black gown and spiked crown, her impossibly long fingers extruding the strands that have bound him in a web of paralyzing malevolence. Eager to feed on his pain and fear, she drags him ever closer. This is the form resistance has taken today. She is indeed a horror. His body was right to be terrified, but now that he can see his enemy, Pa Mercury knows where to focus his will. Got you now, you bitch, he thinks. He visualizes his enemy disappearing in a blaze of white light, wailing, I'm melting, like the Wicked Witch of the West. That makes him grin. In that moment, he bests this queen of spiders. The tendrils constricting him dissolve. All sense of strain dissipates. The knot in his chest loosens, and his heart opens wide. Having been suppressed for so long, the effects of the substantia go from 0 to 100 in seconds, opening up to DMT levels. Pa Mercury sees, as if with open eyes, an unthinkably immense gelatinous darkness that fills his visionary space from horizon to horizon. It's like a galactic tar pit filled with the ignored and the lost and the dead, and yet it sparkles. It is holy. The shadow. He's actually seeing an imaginal representation of the shadow archetype. How fantastic. Under his costume, Pa Mercury breaks out in goose flesh. He thinks of the image described in the narration, a man-shaped hole in the world. He imagines himself as just that, and then draws on the shadow to fill his voidness. Lurid dark purple energy crackles through his body, and with it comes superhuman vitality and well-being. His exaltation is directly proportional to the misery he was suffering just a moment before. Belief space, at last. With snaking arms, he brings his hands to the top of his head. As a spotlight snaps on, casting him in a cone of white light, he tugs at the costume zipper. As it opens, the spotlight seems to set fire to the tips of his cropped hair. It gleams on his forehead, then his chin, then his bare shoulders as he wriggles his way out. Along with Maynard James Keenan, he sings, "See my shadow changing, stretching up and over me, soften this old armor, hoping I can clear the way by stepping through my shadow, coming out the other side, step into the shadow, 46 and 2 are just ahead of me." Pa Mercury is endeavoring to communicate intention to the participants dancing with him, not simply mechanically making the sound of the words he is singing, but meaning them, living them out as his reality in that moment. In so doing, while in his highly altered state of consciousness, 46 and 2 is no longer a century-old example of a defunct music genre, but an incantation. He feels its effects. It's all happening, baby. As Tool crunches through the song's instrumental outro, the music video playing on all screens shows film footage from nuclear tests, trucks flying and houses vaporizing and forests toppling. Seeing that incredible force expressed packs an incredible emotional wallop. Pa Mercury feels it in his bones. He has tapped into the divine. Naked from the waist up, laughing ecstatically, he stomps out a savage war dance. He feels possessed, is possessed. He is a shamanic warrior channeling chthonic power for the benefit of everyone engaged with him in this ritual. He has risked madness for their sake as well as his own, and triumphed. The guitars, bass, and drums restate the opening theme in lockstep. Pa Mercury crouches down to pull the costume down over his hips, then off his legs. As the last power chords crash down, he leaps to his feet again, but this time with blinding white lights flashing on and off behind him. Totally unclothed before the participants, he stands reborn, screaming in exaltation, absolute in his affirmation. Then the lights go out and the next narrative begins. The Transcendental Disco. With the heavy lifting of the StereoMyth behind you, it's time to relax and have some fun. By which I mean explore feelings that span the high of falling in love at first sight to the low of suicidal self-destructiveness, and then on to that ne plus ultra state, realization of the self. The Transcendental Disco is a rite of purification built around 11 pop, new wave, and funk tracks from the 1970s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. It's another opportunity to hone your visionary skill, but this time the challenge will be found in your internal environment. There's also a chance to do archetypal training here, but rather than embodying archetypal figures, you'll be imaginally living through archetypal situations. Structure, stress, and skill in the Transcendental Disco. The Transcendental Disco removes external stressors almost entirely, but just because the stressors are now internal doesn't mean things are going to be easy. I could have titled this chapter, "The Power of Pop." The songs in this section of the playlist are great examples of weaponized emotion. They are incredibly effective at portraying very specific flavors of intense feeling. For instance, Robin's "Dancing on My Own" isn't about generic heartbreak. It's about standing in a corner of a nightclub, watching the person you love kiss someone else, unable to look away though you feel like you're dying. The melody is diabolically catchy. The throbbing synthesizers and pounding beat propulsive, compulsive. It all spins up into a story that's too real if you've ever been similarly bereft, and thus readily re-entered and amplified via phonomancy. Engaging in such psychological purgation will require great courage and emotional flexibility. To stay with it, you'll have to employ all your clarity and self-control. Getting the most out of it will place huge demands on your anti-fragility. But it doesn't have to stop there. If you can immerse yourself in the challenging emotions of the Transcendental Disco, yet retain the presence of mind to appreciate them on an aesthetic level, to fully suffer the pain while offering it up as a gift of loving sacrifice to the goddess, then you'll be well on your way to visionary virtuosity. A rite of purification. Experiencing catharsis via the StereoMyth, and it's not a given, resistance will do its best to derail that transformation, can render you exquisitely sensitive to the self-evidently real energies of spirit. This makes available another form of phonomantic gnosis. The fifth premise of phonomancy comes into play here. To recap, it's that if while in an altered state of consciousness, a subject can feel an emotion to a degree that passes a certain threshold of intensity, they are no longer feeling their personal emotion, but the collective human experience of that emotion, that is, its Jungian archetype. When working phonomantically with Dancing on My Own, for example, you can start by summoning memories of a romantic rejection you've endured. On a sufficiently high dose, if you concentrate on how you felt at the time, really relive the experience, you can become absolutely convulsed with the despair of love denied. This may unleash a veritable flood of supercharged symbolic visionary content, as well as physical symptoms, such as a sensation of waves of force rippling through the body, odd postures, spontaneous mudras, eyes rolling back in the head, and involuntary groaning or wailing. It's both wondrous and excruciating. In the phonomantic method, we refer to such an experience of archetypal activation as an enthusiasm, a portmanteau of orgasm and the Greek enthusiasmos, to be inspired or possessed by a god. An enthusiasm really does feel like you're being visited by something superhuman. The true nature of the phenomenon remains a mystery. Perhaps you were seized by tristessa, the divine sadness, or maybe you've just endured an iota of the way Apollo felt when he was spurned by Daphne. Make of it what you will. Your experience, your interpretation. Whether or not you experience an enthusiasm, the Transcendental Disco is the purifying emotional fire that leaves you shriven and ready for the Anne Frank working. Your name is Penny B. Here's the Transcendental Disco story in brief. Your name is Penny B. You are 22 years old. You were a funny-looking kid, but over the last few years you've gone through a fairly miraculous transformation, and now you are drop-dead gorgeous. This brings you a lot of attention from men. Unfortunately, you have a taste for gorgeous assholes, and the most gorgeous asshole of them all has been making you miserable for the last 6 months. However, you finally caught him dead to rights in the cheating you've suspected all along. This time, you do not accept his lies and excuses. You kick his ass to the curb. Then you get your girlfriends together to celebrate your newfound freedom. Out at your favorite club, having the time of your life, the very last thing you need is to fall in love at first sight. But that's what happens. You take this young man home. After he falls asleep in your arms, you stay awake all night watching him. You are astonished to feel sudden, complete devotion. It feels like every happy ending in the world. You are compelled to tell everyone you meet what's happened. Not to brag, but because you know in your heart that this experience has been promised to us all, and some people need reminding that love is real and on its way. Then he leaves you for your best friend. You are beyond crushed, beyond humiliated, but when confronted with them together at your favorite club, you refuse to leave. You dance on your own. Thus begins an epic symphony of self-destruction. For months you get drunk every night and sleep with the worst men that you can find. One day you wake up in the smoking ruin that was your life and decide it's all a little too much. You resolve to leap from the famous bridge in your city. All you want is to be swallowed by the sea and forgotten. But on the way, you are visited by the goddess herself. She sits you down and gives you a good talking to. She explains to you that all that has happened is part of a plan to bring you to the realization of your full potential. She assures you that your problems are not insurmountable. You can triumph. She will help. You believe her. So you pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and start living again. Along the way, you come to realize that the other half you've been seeking is really your own soul. You begin to catch glimpses of him everywhere. And when you finally meet him, you realize that together you become a channel for the energies of the divine self. Every happy ending is indeed true. Now you will help the world understand. The Transcendental Disco playlist. Here is a chart of how the stages of the hero's journey, the associated archetypes and emotions, and the songs chosen to evoke them in the Transcendental Disco all interrelate. Identify with Penny B as she goes through her journey of love, heartbreak, and salvation. Imagine yourself as a woman experiencing the narrated events. Make it as real as you can and integrate all the contents that emerge from your unconscious into your idea of yourself. This is how you train archetypes of the feminine in the Transcendental Disco. Umbrella. Backstage, Pa Mercury sips water. The costume master fusses over his outfit. Mercury is in drag. His character, Dr. Shonda Freude, is a young institute dropout who acts as phonomancer for the Transcendental disco. During this brief break between songs, he mouths the words of the narration playing on the screens. Of course you fucked him. You took him home and you came together like two planets colliding. This beautiful boy somehow knows all your body's cheat codes. He got all the power-ups and all the extra lives. And you, well, you're pretty sure you gave him an out-of-body experience. It was so good you're surprised nobody called 911 for all the screaming. Shonda Freude wears knee-high white vinyl platform boots, a white miniskirt, white opera gloves, a white cape, white star-shaped sunglasses, and a white wig. The costume master is rearranging the modest false breasts under Pa Mercury's white sports bra. But that doesn't matter. Maybe later it will, but not now. Right now, all that's important is the way he fell asleep in your arms, like a little boy. So vulnerable, so trusting. You want to mother him, which is crazy because you're hardly more than a baby yourself. But there it is. You don't sleep at all that night. You stay awake just to keep feeling yourself holding him. You're safe, you whisper to him over and over. You're safe, you're safe. You make him silent promises. They sound like this. Boom, bap, boom, ba-boom, bap, goes the drum machine. On the video screens appears a sigil that encodes the name Gaia, the ancient Greek personification of Mother Earth. Pa Mercury pushes through the curtain to strut back out on stage. He spits some bars in sync with Jay-Z. He is feeling good. One foot propped before the other, he shimmies his hips, draws graceful figures in the air with his gloved fingertips. He imagines himself as Penny B, lying in bed with her beautiful new man, feeling things she's never felt before, huge feelings she can only compare to what a mother must feel for her child. Pa Mercury knows that maternal love, tinged with eroticism, is an incredibly potent energy to tap. His mouth widens in a blissful smile. Something amazing is about to happen. Along with Rihanna, he sings, "You have my heart and we'll never be worlds apart. Maybe in magazines, but you'll still be my star." The lyrics address a you. Pa Mercury practices his tertiary process thinking. He tells himself, I am that you. Rihanna is singing to me. She is telling him she loves him. All he has to do is listen and feel it. Baby, 'cause in the dark, you can't see shiny cars, and that's when you need me there. With you, I'll always share. When the chorus arrives, the screen shows stylized animations of the goddess Ishtar surrounded by worshippers. Pa Mercury soaks it all in, then closes his eyes. The images of the divine, the feeling of devotion Umbrella conveys, the effects of the substantia, and Mercury's magical consciousness all combine. Under the pressure of his concentration, they combust. Belief is a concept. To believe in action. Belief space is a state of being. It requires no effort. It's responding to what is. And what is, at this point, is that Pa Mercury is suddenly hearing Umbrella as a carrier wave for a whole new layer of information. The goddess is singing to him. When the sun shines, we'll shine together. Told you I'll be here forever. Said I'll always be your friend. Took an oath, I'ma stick it out till the end. Now that it's raining more than ever, know that we'll still have each other. You can stand under my umbrella. This pop ditty is now a pledge, a covenant, an unconditional promise of shelter and succor from the goddess. At least, that's how Pa Mercury experiences it. He is exultant, and because the psilocybin mushrooms respond to emotion, his visionary space spontaneously fills with shining noetic symbols. This only reifies the experience. Pa Mercury knows he could never consciously imagine what he is seeing. He can only be brushing up against the divine. But this is only step one of the process. He has succeeded in experiencing himself as the object of the goddess's attention. Now he will endeavor to experience her as subject. As the second verse begins, he imagines he is singing to Roshana, an ex-girlfriend for whom he still carries a torch. These fancy things will never come in between. You're part of my entity, here for infinity. He does feel soul bonded to her. As he relaxes into that feeling, the love just keeps opening and opening. There's no bottom to it. Supercharged with that emotion, now he imagines that he is Gaia, Mother Earth, and the song lyrics express her most heartful pledge of care and support to all her children. He supports this effort by holding in his conscious imagination Earth Goddess images that he's committed to memory. There's risk here. If his effort doesn't succeed, resistance, that terrible force in the unconscious, will try to pull him down. You're not worthy, it'll whisper. attacking him right where failure has made him vulnerable, or it'll assure him, "You're fooling yourself," or "It's all a lie." But it's resistance that's the liar. Hell is a lie. All Pa Mercury can do is set up the conditions for success and abide in hope and faith. The goddess will decide, in her ineffable way, whether to incarnate in his consciousness. On this score, Pa Mercury's attitude is on point. If she doesn't grace him with her presence, he will practice modulating his disappointment. He'll engage resistance and grow stronger. And if she does, she does. During the song's bridge, Rihanna sings, "You can come into my arms. It's okay, don't be alarmed. Come into me. There's no distance in between our love." Pa Mercury is a natural baritone, but he's worked hard to increase his range. He matches Rihanna note for note, and then something happens he never imagined he might achieve with a song from the Transcendental disco: identification. What that means is, in the moment, he is concentrating so intensely he hears Rihanna's voice as his own. He has neurally remapped his oral experience of the music onto his proprioception of his vocal apparatus. Rihanna's voice is his voice, and because he is experiencing Rihanna as the goddess broadcasting on all channels, by the transitive property, he becomes the goddess. "Go on and let the rain pour. I'll be all you need and more." It begins as a vision of the Black Madonna. He sees a young woman with dark skin in a colorful headscarf and matching dress. She cups her left breast as she suckles the infant she carries in a sling. Then Mercury is that young woman with the child fiercely attached to his nipple, and he feels pleasure so intense it vibrates down his spine to between his legs. This vibration grows and grows as the scene changes. Now Pa Mercury sees the entire world as a great egg split in two longitudinally and laying on its side. The upper half contains all the planets and stars, and the lower all the seas and continents daubed with enameled clouds, and the two are axially connected by a mountain dwarfing tree made of iridescent solid light. Everyday concrete language cannot capture how sheerly wonderful it is to look within and see the earth as if designed by Peter Carl Fabergé, Walt Disney, and Joseph Campbell, and know it to be a living, breathing thing. The great goddesses, his beloved child, nestled in a crib upholstered by the sparkling black velvet of outer space. Pa Mercury doesn't try to think. He simply marvels and loves her creation. There was more, but later, that's all Pa Mercury will remember. The energy fueling his visions has become overwhelming. Waves of force are rippling through him, so strong that it feels like he's being torn apart at a molecular level. His body contorts. He hears wailing, somebody crying, "Ah!" Realizes it's him. Doesn't care. This is an enthusiasm, a miraculous visitation. It's excruciating, but he never ever wants it to stop. Finally, he comes out of the crazy standing backbend he'd been doing. Umbrella is over. The participants are applauding. His rhythm phonomancers are grinning at him from their platforms and throwing the heavy metal horns. His breakthrough was theirs as well. He's gone to the other side and returned with blessings for all. Inside, Pa Mercury is still screaming in ecstatic adoration, like a 13-year-old girl attending the Beatles' Ed Sullivan Show premiere. He can't believe what just happened. While the next narration plays, he takes a knee and bows his head, trying to regain his composure. Then a thumping bass guitar and kick drum introduce horn stabs. He looks up and grins. "Best of My Love" by The Emotions is on. It's time to get back to work. The Anne Frank working. When I was conducting my initial phonomantic experiments, the civil war in Syria was raging. A photo of 3-year-old Alan Kurdi lying dead on a beach, drowned when his family tried to escape the violence in a rubber dinghy, had become emblematic of the conflict. At the time, I was tertiary process thinking very hard. The ceremonies I was doing needed to mean something. They should have a purpose. It occurred to me that by working with O Comely and some other songs phonomantically, I could somehow offer comfort to the spirits of murdered children around the world. Madness, but maybe a divinely inspired madness. The result was the Anne Frank working, the rite of atonement that is the most solemn, sacred, horrifying, exalting part of the First Church of David Bowie shamanic cabaret. A rite of atonement. Let me be candid. There's never been anything like the Anne Frank working. Not in religion, not in art. It inflicts incredible levels of emotional stress, then soothes and heals and elevates one to an experience of the most transcendent beauty. There is no limit to its possible depths and potential heights. Navigating the Anne Frank working will require you to dig deep for all the courage, clarity, self-control, self-overcoming, anti-fragility, and emotional flexibility you can muster. And it never gets easier. As you gain skill with its psychological and spiritual tasks, it only grows more intense. But learning to fully engage with the process will make you a better version of yourself. Mythos. The narrative for the Anne Frank working is based on visionary material I collected that summer of 2017. It is in fact the frame story for the entire cabaret, the setting for its ARG. The story is a myth. That is, it's an interpretive model you can use to make sense of events and give meaning to actions. It's real only for those who believe in it. The more people who believe in it, though, the more real it becomes. Face the music. In the Anne Frank working narrative, things are falling apart, the center cannot hold, and the end of the world is nigh. After 5 centuries of genocide, industrial warfare, slavery, and conquest, our progress as a species has come to a hard stop. We are blocked by the energetic residue of some 330 million murders, which is like a wall that stands between us and our destiny as citizens of the transcendent. Picture it as made of blocks of black stone 6 feet long by 2 feet high by 3 feet wide, each a symbolic coffin for a lost innocent. It's a monument to our stupidity, selfishness, cruelty, and evil, and it stopped us in our collective tracks. But the momentum of history continues to push up from behind, and because we cannot move forward, pressure is building. And there is a ticking clock. Called by the screams of her children, the feminine face of the eternal Godhead, the Holy Ma, is returning to directly influence historical time. If we're still stuck when the full force of her energy arrives, the pressure will become too great and there will be a rupture. It might manifest as a nuclear war, or a superflu epidemic, or total climate catastrophe, or an extinction-level event comet strike. To survive, we must get past that wall. It must come down, and that can only happen the way it went up, 1 block at a time. Each individual death must be atoned for. No one can begin to understand the extent of our collective crimes, but what we can do is meditate on the fate of one person who fell victim to all the madness. In the Anne Frank working, we use the imaginative powers granted by a high dose of psychedelic substantia to contemplate the murder of Anne Frank. We make it as real as possible. We live the terror with her. We feel the crushing loss of what she might have meant to the world had she lived. This ordeal is an act of penance. Each time someone performs it, 1 block of that black wall of murder is removed, perhaps enough to let a little pressure escape and buy us more time. 1 down, 330,299,999 to go. If enough people do the Anne Frank working enough times, we'll tear down that wall, and the momentum of history will carry us into the bright science-fictional future that the Holy Ma has prepared. The Anne Frank working playlist. The Anne Frank working comprises the last 4 songs from Neutral Milk Hotel's album In the Airplane Over the Sea, plus an a cappella rendition of Pearl Jam's song Release. If one considers the first song of the working, O Comely, as being the ordeal stage, the ordering works as a truncated version of the hero's journey. A couple of these target emotions could use some elucidation. Saudade is a deep emotional state of profound melancholic longing for something or someone that one cares for and/or loves. It describes a feeling both happy and sad. That's as close a word as I can find for the complex of feelings conveyed by Two-Headed Boy Part 2. It's a song about the eventual, inevitable loss of everything we love. My personal visionary experience indicates our willingness to love in the face of that loss is a gift of gratitude we can offer the goddess. She derives aesthetic pleasure from all human emotion, but courageously suffered heartbreak most of all. Not out of cruelty or sadism, it's just so achingly beautiful to her. It's in our brave submission to the inescapable that we can transcend ourselves. Amor fati. The Latin phrase una ad astra in aeternum translates as together to the stars forever, which, punctuated with a gesture that means fuck yeah, is the phonomantic motto. The feeling you're after is a sense of gratitude for the opportunity to serve the divine will, a fierce commitment to your colleagues in that service, and a ferocious joy for the challenges ahead. Our Lady of Death. After the narration, O Comely begins with 2 minutes of odd, dissonant, unsettling synthesizer tones. On the screens appear an image of the Mexican folk saint La Santa Muerte, Our Lady of Death. During the summer when I began my phonomantic experiments, I was still sitting with my ayahuasca group 3 nights a month. After ceremonies, I would walk my dog around the grounds of the estate where the ceremonial yurt was located. Alone in the dark, still mareado, I found myself hunching over, taking small steps, my hands hooked into claws. I'd hiss and cackle and screech as my head filled with visions of gravestones glowing green behind wrought iron fencing. It was spooky and bizarre. It felt amazing. I immediately associated this odd behavior with Santa Muerte, and because I like nothing better than a good syncretism, when I debuted the cabaret for Two Friends in early December 2017, I had already planned out how to incorporate her into the show. Oh, comely. Veronica leans close to whisper in Luke's ear. This is going to be hard, she says. Really hard. Please, when the moment comes, close your eyes. Luke nods without looking at her. As part of his preparation for this ceremony, he's watched the phonomantic video for Neutral Milk Hotel's Oh Comely. He knows what's coming, and he knows she's right. The screens announce the Anne Frank working. The narrator appears and explains the existential crises humanity faces and how they are caused by the energetic residue of centuries of mass murder. He says if that energy isn't cleared, the world as they know it will end. What's required is penance and atonement. He suggests a way that might be accomplished. Joseph Stalin once said, "One murder is a tragedy, but a million murders, that's a statistic." And Stalin was right. You cannot grasp 1 million murders, let alone 330 million. You just can't. Your mind won't allow it. But what you can do is think about one person, one face, one name, one story that you know like she told it to you herself, because she did, in a book you read when you were in 7th grade. It was called The Diary of a Young Girl, and the author was Anne Frank. A string quartet begins playing. The music is ineffably sad. At the same time, a school portrait of Anne when she was 12 or 13 appears on the screens. Slowly, the video zooms in on her smiling face. Anne Frank lived in fear in Amsterdam for 2 years, until she was dragged out into the street under the eyes of her neighbors, who did not protest, and shoved into a car and taken to a building where she waited without being allowed to pee, and then pushed onto a rail car, and then taken to a camp, and in that camp she withered away until she died of typhus. Then she was just another dead, naked adolescent girl, heaped on the corpses of other teenagers, because a particular guard had a fetish for that sort of thing, and he liked to take photographs. As this litany of awfulness goes on, Luke's heart quails. He reaches for Veronica's hand. She squeezes it tightly. So during this next song, think about Anne Frank. Bring her to life in your consciousness and go through that experience with her. You must own it. Live the terror. Feel the true crushing weight of her loss. Suffer and do penance for our collective wrongs. When you're done, there will be one less 6 foot by 3 foot by 2 foot block in that wall. Maybe that will be enough that a little of that pressure can escape. Maybe it will have bought us a little more time. If enough of us do this shadow work, we can finally grow up as a civilization. We can become the citizens of the transcendent we are meant to be. So do this right with me. It means something, everyone says together with the video. It's our responsibility. It's all up to us. As creepy slow-motion synthesizer oscillations begin droning from the sound system, Pa Mercury steps on stage in the costume of La Santa Muerte, Our Lady of Death. He's wearing a black floor-length dress, elbow-length skeleton gloves, a skull mask, a blue cape with a cowl pulled over his head, and over that, a colorful hand-knitted Afghan worn as a shawl. He carries a framed portrait of Anne Frank. He takes small, pained steps. He screeches. When he gets to the microphone, he stops and waits. Eventually, an unsettling eternity later, it seems to Luke, O Comely begins. There is a squall of noise, and then someone is strumming an open E chord on an acoustic guitar, accentuating the root, fifth, and octave notes. The rhythm is simple, the tempo funereal. No other instruments play. The accompanying music video is 2 films composited together. One is in black and white, the other is in color. In the black and white film, a pair of teenage girls are gazing at something in a shop window and chatting animatedly. The camera cuts to a diary on display, then pans to a close-up of the pensive face of the girl on the right. We see the Star of David patch sewn in the lapel of her coat. This is Anne Frank. And superimposed over her, in color but mostly transparent, is the figure of Santa Muerte. It's an actor in a ridiculously low-budget DIY costume, but it's awful anyways. She is like a hungry ghost hovering, dreadful and implacable. O Comely is a dirge. It's a song about death, about the death of a girl, the death of this bright-eyed young girl on screen. O Comely, NMH's Jeff Mangum cants. His voice is both plaintive and sonorous, with a faint rasp that sounds like silk tearing. Pa Mercury doubles it almost perfectly. I will be with you when you lose your breath. In the video, Anne turns away from the shop window and bumps into a tall boy. Her expression is a mix of surprise, fear, and delight. She and the boy talk. It looks like they're bantering back and forth. Anne's eyes are wide and never stop staring into his. Luke is suddenly struck by a realization as shockingly awful as it is obvious. This was a person, not a character in a movie, not a photo on a book jacket. Suddenly he can see Anne in his mind, a real girl who lived in fear and died in misery. Luke's throat grows tight. The video has followed Anne as the boy walks her home. When they reach her doorstep, they talk a little more. Anne nods happily as they shake hands, and then she watches the boy as he takes his leave. They've just made a date, Luke thinks. She's so excited. But always, lurking in the background, waiting with her terrible greedy hunger, is Santa Muerte. Then the chorus arrives, breaking his reverie. Pa Mercury and his rhythm phonomancers lead the participants in singing along. Say what you want to say, hang for your hollow ways, moving your mouth to pull out all your miracle from me. The last three notes, melismatic on the word me, rise higher and higher until Jeff's voice breaks. Then there's only the acoustic guitar again, pounding out G and D chords. In his seat, Luke rocks back and forth to the rhythm. A new verse begins. Your father made fetuses with flesh-licking ladies, while you and your mother were asleep in the trailer park. But on the video, there is no sign of Anne. It seems like ancient newsreel footage. People are being pulled from their homes and dragged through the streets. Police beat them with clubs, and soldiers march them at gunpoint. Luke watches for a moment, then closes his eyes. A waking dream begins. He sees Anne in the secret annex, as if he is standing unnoticed in a corner of the little room where the girl is sitting. This Anne has a passing resemblance to the young actress in the video footage, but it's not the same person. This girl looks a lot like Veronica. He watches her gnaw on the end of her pen, then write in a journal in neat script. He can smell the dust, the mice droppings, the faint stench of too many bodies cooped up in close quarters for too long. He sees Anne/Veronica having a whispered argument with one of the neighbors. She almost slams a door, then realizes at the last second such a loud, unexpected noise might draw attention. She sits on her bed with her fists in her eyes and cries in silent, helpless fury. There are more scenes, now coming almost faster than Luke can process. When it threatens to overwhelm, he opens his eyes, but that is no relief. In the video, people are being beaten in a city square, then forced to climb up onto trucks. And this violence is coming for her, for Veronica. She is Anne now, risking a peek through a crack in a boarded-up window at the chaos below. Her terror is like a fist closing on her heart. Luke feels it in his own chest, but that is nothing compared to when they finally hear boots on the wooden stairs, the crash of camouflaging shelves being torn down, fists hammering on the no longer secret door. Men in dark suits enter their apartment, and men in police uniforms, and men in army uniforms. Then Veronica and her family are being shoved out into the hallway, and one of the police, a boy barely older than she, kicks her mother after she dropped her handbag and bent to pick it up, and Veronica slaps him, and then three of the men grab her and pull her away. Her family is screaming. They take her to a storeroom, and Luke is unable to bear witness to what comes next. Knowing what does, the imaginal events seared into his soul. He is just in time to see, in the video, soldiers slamming shut the tailgates on trucks crammed with Jews. And then on the screen there are words in all capital letters. Don't close your eyes, which really means close your eyes, because what is coming next is the ordeal. Veronica told him not to look. Not yet, but he must look. The shame and sorrow of what happened to Anne and 6 million other Jews, and the untold hundreds of millions of other people who have died in unfathomably horrible ways at the hands of their fellow human beings, these are crimes that cry out for judgment and punishment. Luke understands. He thinks, if we do not do penance somehow for these wrongs, we deserve whatever horrible cataclysm carries us away. And there is only one way to atone. He must own it, to suffer the terror and the shame. So Luke keeps his eyes open as the chorus comes around again, and they are surrounded by the photographs from the camps displayed on the screens. The first is a black and white image of dozens and dozens of naked corpses stacked like cordwood. Then comes a color shot, taken from only 6 or 7 feet away. Another pile of bodies, all young men, and Luke feels for them the excruciating humiliation of their nudity because they feel nothing anymore. Then comes the last photo. Cruelly slow, the video pans down a veritable mountain of bones and entrails, human and animal. The ground at its base is carpeted with skulls, hundreds of them, some perforated by bullet holes, some broken open by truncheons, all carelessly strewn about, disregarded as refuse. Clutching his head, Luke rocks back and forth in his folding chair. The last image merges into a vision he is having. A dump truck pulls into the intersection of 2 main streets near his apartment. The bed lifts, the tailgate opens, and pouring out come human remains, pouring and pouring until there is a charnel heap 10 feet high. And in that pile of torn flesh and broken bones, there is a girl. Oh my God, a 3-year-old girl, and she's been nearly ripped in half, one sneaker dangling from her tiny foot. In a distant way, Luke is aware that he is singing the last high note of the chorus along with everyone else. It is a keening wail of communal mortification. But there is something else. He feels like he is shouting a message down into the abyss of history. Sheol, says a voice in his head, but he doesn't know what that word means. Some combination of, you are not forgotten, and we will not fail you. There isn't time to think about it though. Words fill the video screens completely. Their effect is shockingly visceral. Luke's body reacts as if someone has grabbed him by the shoulders and shouted in his face. They were your neighbors. They were your friends. How could you have done this, was the implication. Luke hadn't done it, hadn't even been alive when it happened, but still he feels searing guilt. What happened was his fault. It was all their faults. The crime is collective. The punishment will be too if the offense against heaven isn't somehow repented and repaired. There is no question of fairness. It is simply how things are. And he knows that all at once, intuitively, as surely as he knows his own name. Perhaps only a minute has passed in objective time since the chorus began. So much has happened, though, it seems much longer. There is a brief break in the singing. Jeff Mangum's guitar strums that E5 power chord for a couple measures, and then everyone is again chanting in unison, singing do-do-do like in a pop song. But the feeling this conveys is ancient, like a story handed down from generation to generation of slavery and exile and oppression and perseverance and faith. Luke imagines himself as an old man with a bushy gray beard, wearing a dusty black suit with a white prayer shawl over the shoulders. As this old man, he sings along. His bones feel weary, but also like they are lined with adamantium. His people have endured so long. They have endured so much, but they will see the job done. There is no question. What job that is, Luke isn't sure. It has something to do with a necessary sacrifice, a plan too big and too awful and too glorious to contemplate. His mind shies away from it, and he opens his eyes. Pa Mercury has propped the portrait of Anne in the crook of his elbow so that he can tug off his skeleton gloves. Then he reaches up to pull the Afghan blanket off his head and shoulders. I know they buried her body with others, he sings along with the recording. With each line of the lyric, a different photograph of Anne Frank appears on the screen. First, a school photo, Anne at 13. Then a candid shot of a younger Anne, lost in thought. Her sister and mother and 500 families is paired with an image of the Frank family, all smiles, dressed in smart dresses and hats. When Pa Mercury comes to the next line, he pulls off the skull mask, revealing his handsome face. Mascara tracks down his brown cheeks like black tears. And will she remember me, 50 years later? I wish I could save her in some sort of time machine. He pulls off the blue cowled cape, and then, in one fluid movement, the black funeral dress, which he drops carelessly to the floor. He stands shirtless in his knee-length black work shorts. Know all your enemies, he sings. Now the images are of inmates, a black and white photo of children in adult-sized striped uniforms behind the barbed wire of a Nazi concentration camp. We know who our enemies are. Then another black and white image, Japanese-American citizens corralled behind cattle fencing, identity tags on their coats. Know all your enemies. This time the line is matched to a color photo of Mexican refugees detained behind chain-link fence. But when the line was repeated a last time, we know who our enemies are. The image was the unmistakable head and shoulders of the 21st century fascist Donald Trump, shot from behind as he clenches his fist before an American flag. Once again, Mangum sings a melody without real words, just the syllable da. With it comes that sense of the sweep of history and the quest for a reason to endure. Around Luke, people get to their feet. They stand up tall, tuck their elbows into their sides, then lift their hands in the ritual gesture of affirmation and assent, index and pinky fingers extended, ring and middle fingers tucked and crossed by the thumb. Luke does the same, his palms supinated, reflecting the energy of his intention back at himself. He remembers the prayer for this moment suggested in the phonomantic manual. We say yes, he thinks. Even though we don't understand, even to all this awfulness, we say yes. And he watches as on screen there plays a scene from a 20th century movie called Schindler's List. A little girl in a red coat, her garment the only color in the black and white footage, runs unnoticed through a crowd of Jews being marched at gunpoint through the streets. She makes her way into an abandoned apartment building and then into a bedroom strewn with broken furniture where she crawls under a bed to hide. Luke starts to cry. He tucks his elbows to his sides more tightly and extends his fingers more rigidly. We say yes. We say yes. Goldeline, my dear, we will fold and freeze together, Pa Mercury sings. The mushrooms allow Luke to hear the delicate, incredibly quick pulses of the phonomancer's voice as he matches Jeff Mangum's vibrato. It sounds almost insectile, and Luke has a brief imaginal flash of a giant mantis standing protectively above a swaddled human infant found abandoned in the woods. Far away from here, there is sun and spring and green forever. The music is changed, no longer a dirge, but a kind of lullaby. Matched to the music video, the guitar strums eighth notes on a minor chord as Mangum offers the girl hiding under the bed a story of comfort, deliverance, and rebirth. But now we move to feel. Pour ourselves inside some stranger's stomach. Place your body here. Let your skin begin to blend itself with mine. He holds the last word, the I syllable stretching out across the da-da-da melody of morning. On the screens, a sigil appears. It looks like a swastika that has been broken and hammered into a shape that somehow recalls a Star of David, a Cairo cross, and an infinity symbol. It encodes the intention, we are so fucking sorry. Luke and the rest of the participants concentrate on it with all their might. Squalling, Julian pipes join the acoustic guitar. Now the room vibrates with a sound that is both heartbreaking and glorious. It is the sound of bottomless grief and unbreakable resolve. It is a sound that seeps from the deepest pits of the underworld and rings against the stars in the endless sky above. It is the hum of the engine that will take them into a future where all the pain and sacrifice will be redeemed. Why in the world would you put yourself through that? The short answer is that the goddess asked us. The longer answer is that the ritual doesn't stop there in that awfulness. After the ordeal stage comes the reward, then the road home, and the emergence of the new self, and the return with the boon. After beginning in the deepest shame and sorrow, the Anne Frank working ends on a note of perfect transcendent beauty. Your ability to exult in that beauty is directly proportional to your ability to feel the abyssal despair that results from confronting the reality of the Holocaust with all the vulnerable sensitivity that a high dose of psychedelic creates. The strength to tolerate that strain is currently beyond most human beings, but it can be trained. I wasn't kidding earlier. The phonomantic method builds supranormal spiritual capacities, and if we're to pull out of our civilizational nosedive, that's what we need. For the human race to survive the challenges to come, we'll need legion upon legion of shamanic superheroes who have a why that allows them to endure anyhow. Entheatainments like the cabaret will be where they are created. Release. When Two-Headed Boy Part 2 ends, there is silence. It seems to last forever. Standing with everyone else, Veronica's chest starts to tighten in anxiety. Shouldn't the next song have started by now? Has there been some sort of technical problem? The room is electric with possibility, with the potential for magic. But what if something's gone wrong and the moment is lost? Wait, is she getting paranoid? Maybe that third hit of pot wasn't the best idea. Then the room fills with a man's deep voice, droning on the syllable Om before fading out. The singer, Eddie Vedder, was very famous in the late 20th century. This track is an a cappella version of a song he sang with his band Pearl Jam. It's called Release. Breathing a sigh of relief, Veronica opens her eyes. On all the screens is the phonomancer symbol, the sacred 45 RPM disc pierced by a double-ended as above, so below arrow. Glowing white against the absolute black, the symbol seemed to float in space. When Vedder's voice returns, Pa Mercury doubles it. On the third repetition, all the rhythm phonomancers join in unison. The sound is hair-raisingly powerful. I see the world is the first line of the lyric. But it isn't Pa Mercury singing along. A spotlight has turned on over one of the rhythm phonomancers. Veronica doesn't know his name. He is a barrel-chested white man in his late 20s. He has curly dark hair and long sideburns. The phonomancer symbol is tattooed on his left shoulder. He does an admirable job of matching the sonorous, bassoon-like tone of the recorded vocalist. "Feel the chill," answers the phonomancer diagonal to him. This person Veronica does know. Their name is Ka Ganymede. Ka G is a petite, non-binary beauty. Although they have no visible breasts, they wear the female phonomancer's traditional uniform of white sports bra and black work pants. Which way to go? The light flashes on over Veronica's friend Ma Artemis, who is tall and big-hipped. "Windowsill," continues Ma Kali, a Sri Lankan American who looks like the MMA fighter she is. "I see the words on the rocking horse of time," Pa Hendricks sings. He is stationed at the back of the room, opposite Pa Mercury. Pa Hendricks has skin the color of mahogany and an enormous head of blue and gold dreadlocks that glow like hot metal under the spotlight. "I see the birds in the rain," Pa Mercury concludes the verse, and then they all come back in to drone on the ohms. The black background of the phonomancer symbols on the giant screens has been replaced by a streaming star field. Veronica stares, entranced, as an odd, delicious sensation steals up on her. Catalyzed by that extra dose of THC, the mushroom energy is making a surprising last-inning comeback. The expanse of her awareness suddenly becomes exponentially larger. She can hear voices in her head, voices that are thoughts, but not her thoughts. "Oh hey, she's close," someone says. She has an image of someone tapping on a window through which she is being observed. It's a man with a red beard. She can almost but not quite see him. It's like looking at someone from the corner of her eye. He says, "Veronica, hey, Veronica." "Hey," she thinks, "I can hear you. I can see you, sort of." She gets the impression that there are others present. They are celebrating, high-fiving and hugging. Joy flashes through her, a sense of recognition and homecoming so shockingly strong it jolts her out of her waking dream and back into consensus reality. She puts a hand on Luke's arm to steady herself. "Oh dear Dad, can you see me now?" Pa Mercury sings, duetting again with Eddie Vedder. "I am myself, like you somehow." Bathing in the sound, Veronica tries to figure out what has just happened. She knows those people, she thinks. Where does she know them from? "That's your support team," comes the response from her soul. "They're always keeping tabs while you're inserted into the game. Try to remember." She sees a NASCAR pit crew in matching bright yellow uniforms, swarming over an idling race car, readying it for the next leg of the race. "I'll ride the wave, where it takes me." Eddie Vedder's voice rises to an operatic bellow on the last syllable. Pa Mercury somehow manages to match it. Veronica is amazed that she can actually discern individual harmonics in the sound, glittering like light on a dragon's hoard of gold coins. "I'll hold the pain. Release me." The droning ohm returns, with all the phonomancers singing in harmony. After the second repetition, the pitch drops a perfect fourth to waggle an exaggerated vibrato on the syllable I. There is a story in that sound. It's about courage and determination, and transcendence somehow, through joyous acceptance, through amor fati. Second verse. All the participants join. Veronica sings, "Oh dear Dad, can you see me now?" Luke takes her hand and squeezes it as he sings along. She smiles back, grateful that Luke had taken seriously his preparations for this ceremony. He'd understood that this is a performance for everyone, not just the phonomancers. Everyone in attendance was part of the band, so to speak, and thus could contribute to the beauty and intensity of the experience. "I will wait up in the dark for you to speak to me." 60 voices raise high. The whole room, the participants and phonomancers, the chairs and the platforms and the screen and the lights, the spaces between them, all become one resonant object, a great bell whose vibrations Veronica can feel ringing through her body. With her eyes closed, she watches her own consciousness react to the sound like a still pool accepting dozens of carefully dropped stones, individual impacts causing splashes that send out luminous ripples that interfere with each other to create patterns of spectacular complexity. It is the single most beautiful thing she's ever seen in her life, and she understands instantly and effortlessly that this describes the universe, at this level and every other, events colliding to make one unthinkably vast, impossibly complex and perfect structure, a living no thing that sings Om in praise of its source, the Madonna Matrix, the great goddess. I'll open up, release me. On the screens, the music video shows an animation based on a painting by visionary artist Alex Gray. A man lies on his deathbed. He is surrounded by a wall of blue eyes that watch raptly as his spirit exits like shimmering smoke through the crown of his head. It rises and rises. Release me, the room sings. Release me, as his spirit merges with a blazing white light. Veronica's eyelids flutter. Her eyes roll back in her head. And then, for the last time that day, but far from the last time in her life, she again feels that instantaneous exponential expansion of her consciousness. The right side of her visionary space fills with a supernova glow so intense she feels blistering heat on her cheek and the ear. In her mind, someone is relaying a message of great importance that she understands completely, but it's gone the very next moment. It's okay, though. In time, the download will extract itself. When the light recedes, she is left with a simple, pellucid image, a little girl in her bedroom, playing on a worn hardwood floor, morning sunlight streaming through the dust motes in the air as she keeps herself company with the stories she is telling about her toys and dolls. Veronica is singing, she realizes, Om. While in the throes of her vision, another part of herself has found the note she can contribute to the wave of emotion that has enveloped them all. She gives it everything she's got. Out of the white light on the screens emerges the star field again, and superimposed on it, the phonomancer symbol. And Veronica gets it. Finally and completely, she gets it. The music is the portal through which they can explore the highest highs and the deepest depths of existence. It is all the goddess, and is all truly good. That feeling is illustrated in the final movement of the music. She knows just the right moment to go up a perfect fifth into her head voice, and then all the way up to the octave. They all hold that last high note, singing through their grins, delighting in the shivery brilliance of the sound. And then it's done. The lights go out completely, then slowly increase to a dim glow. Pa Mercury and the other phonomancers have left their platforms. No one applauds. Not yet. The show's title and credits appear in the screens. Then a final message. Thanks for coming. We hope you had fun. Remember, your ma loves you. Remember. Theophany and revelation. In earlier vignettes, we saw two examples of phonomantic gnosis, belief space and enthusiasm. During release, Veronica experiences two more, theophany and revelation. I use the term theophany advisedly. It refers to the temporal and spatial manifestation of God in some tangible form, like Moses' burning bush and John Smith's first vision, and my experiences, on which I based Veronica's, haven't been quite that. What compels me to categorize them as theophany is the intense physical sensations of light and heat I feel. My eyelids grow red, shading into white, and my skin burns as if someone is shining a movie premiere spotlight on my face from 6 feet away. Along with that, there is communication in the form of a voice speaking directly into my ear. What is said is intelligible, but unavailable for recall as soon as the moment is over. Maybe as I continue to develop my phonomantic skills, I'll be able to retain more of these experiences. Revelation is a noetic vision that communicates novel and actionable ideas. The pellucid image that comes to Veronica of a girl child at play first arrived from me in 2019. Symbolic, I was given to understand, of being itself, and later received many elaborations. These waking lucid dreams became the foundation for a personal cosmogonic and ontological myth. It fits with, but is distinct from, the apocalyptic mythos that is the frame story of the cabaret. It has interesting parallels with the so-called perennial philosophy and certain strains of early Christian Gnosticism. In the past, people who had such experiences and possessed the requisite charisma could convince others that their insights were universally true. Now that the phonomantic method makes revelation available to all, that's no longer appropriate. It's up to you to get in there and obtain directly the information necessary to construct a myth of your own. Part 6. Practice. Psychospiritual workout. Hot yoga classes are composed of asanas, or poses, in a particular sequence. Each challenges your balance, flexibility, and strength in a different way. You need to do them all, in order for the training to work as designed. The song selections in a phonomantic rite function in a similar manner. Like our friend the line bending into new shapes, you're adopting various psychological configurations. Each is an emotional asana. The lead phonomancer's job is to demonstrate each pose to the best of their ability. There's a platonic ideal, but everyone's version will be a little different depending on their unique construction and level of development. It's not a one and done thing. You don't finish a hot yoga class and think, well, I guess I got that down. You return over and over again to practice and progress. As the line can attest, effort over time yields improvement. With practice, what improves is not just your ability to adopt the emotional poses, but your understanding of what they are meant to accomplish. As that understanding deepens, your focus moves from the external, how do I dance to this song, to the internal, how do I release the tension I'm experiencing so that I can feel this song's target emotion more deeply, to the artistic, how can I more fully become Prince in this moment, to the transpersonal, how can I amplify my superconduction of the energies of the self? At that point, you're really cooking with Crisco. Your execution of an assigned psychospiritual exercise becomes an act of service for everyone present. White belt to black belt. Somewhat akin to the belt systems used in various martial arts, the phonomantic method defines 8 levels of psychedelic skill. These are not quote-unquote ranks per se. The levels are milestones that mark progress as you learn the basics, work your way up to training with a group, pursue visionary skill, which is to say active agency in terms of how the substantia's effects manifest, and then, if you want, visionary virtuosity, the ability to demonstrate supranormal psychological and spiritual capacities. Level 0. In a controlled private environment, get comfortable using a minimum effective dose. If you've never used psychedelics before, have at least a couple journeys before trying out the phonomantic method. Traditional set and setting works best for novices. Quiet space, comfortable couch, soothing music, supportive friend. Depending on your body size and sensitivity, your minimum effective dose could be anywhere between 1.5 and 3 grams. When establishing your initial dose, remember, you can always take more, but you can't take less. Level 1. Using a minimum effective dose, alone and in a private setting, demonstrate the ability to stick to a planned structure, that is, a predetermined playlist of songs, from beginning to end. In addition to altering your perceptions, the substantia has the effect of making you more distractible. Paying attention, staying on task, and thinking straight will require effort. That effort will improve your clarity, one of the 6 aspects of visionary skill. You also need to build the courage and self-control to be able to do this without a sitter. Level 2. Using a minimum effective dose, alone and in a private setting, execute external tasks with the goal of entering the emotional space of the songs on the playlist. Getting into songs develops your emotional flexibility. It starts with intent listening, but it's completed in embodiment. This is accomplished initially by dancing and later singing along. If you have trouble loosening up enough to dance or resisting the urge to lie down and dream, then you must work on your self-overcoming. Success later depends on you having the discipline to have fun now. Level 3. Starting with a minimum effective dose, alone and in a private setting, while maintaining level 1 and level 2 requirements, perform internal activities with the goal of personal and transpersonal inquiry. Increase your dosage incrementally over time. Once you are able to reliably enter target emotions, you can begin running another task in parallel. It requires all 6 visionary subskills: courage, clarity, self-control, self-overcoming, anti-fragility, and emotional flexibility. By continuously monitoring your visionary space, that is, what you see with your eyes closed, and observing the images that arise, you can glean insights into your personal psychology and obtain information about your transpersonal environment. This data can be used to reinforce tertiary process thinking, setting the stage for deeper experiences. Stay at L3 until you've worked your way up to 1.5 to 2 times the dose with which you started before taking part in an entheatainment in level 4. Training monthly, this process may take anywhere from a single season to a year or more. In a sense, you can never truly master level 3. The challenge increases in proportion to your dosage. Even experienced phonomancers should return to L3 when pushing their dosage limits. Public ceremonies are not the place to realize you've overdone it. Stay home and stay safe. Level 4. Using 75% of your top L3 dose as part of a group in a ceremonial setting, demonstrate L1 to L2 skills while regulating your response to external and internal stressors. Level 4 is L2 in the expanded environment of an entheatainment. On first exposure, put your internal experience on the back burner and get used to this new setting. Once you're comfortable, start turning inward again. Entheatainments are designed to subject participants to all kinds of environmental external stressors. Make sure that any challenging experiences that arise do not compel you to act in a way that impacts the experience of those around you. Focus on your self-control, then strengthen your anti-fragility so that stressors deepen your experience rather than distract or disrupt it. Level 5. As part of a group in a ceremonial setting, demonstrate L1 to L4 skills while working with a dosage that allows you to enter deep visionary states. Level 5 is specifically about pushing into heroic dose levels while participating in an entheatainment. Begin with your top L3 dose and go from there. Group ceremonies can be energetically chaotic, so be prepared to respond to inner events with any and all of your 6 visionary subskills. Why take on this additional challenge? Because being around others who are doing serious internal inquiry and achieving rarefied visionary states is very conducive to the success of your own efforts. You'll be able to go deeper and bring back more than you could working on your own. Level 6. Using a heroic or superheroic dose as part of a group in a ceremonial setting, maintain the standards of levels 1 through 5 while acting in support of participants and the group leader. Level 6 is achieved when you have yourself so sorted you can afford to expand your area of quote-unquote tactical responsibility. Make the effort to increase the information density in the room by dancing and singing with some degree of skill, as well as performing all other ritual actions to standard. The intent is to amplify the intensity of the experience for all those present. L6 can be practiced from the floor as a senior member of the participant group or from the platforms as one of the rhythm phonomancers supporting the lead phonomancer. Level 7. Using a superheroic dose as part of a group in a ceremonial setting, maintain the standards of levels 1 through 6 while carrying out the tasks of a lead phonomancer. A superheroic dose is the standard quote-unquote heroic dose of 5 to 10 grams of cubensis taken with harmaline. This combination, sometimes referred to as ayahuasca, effectively doubles the payload of the mushrooms. Throw in some hits of pot and psychoactive hape on top of that, and you've got a recipe for DMT-level visionary access, but also potential catastrophe. Walking on stage under such a load to act as a ceremony's shaman, go-go dancer, tribute act, group fitness instructor, and sacrificial victim, to be a lead phonomancer, requires both superlative visionary skill and serious aplomb. It is a demonstration of visionary virtuosity. Align who can bend. Visionary virtuosity is the ability, while on a superheroic dose of psychedelic substantia, to deal with the vagaries of shamanic reality while maintaining global awareness of the external environment, while entering and exiting profound trance states at will, while conducting psychospiritual exercises based on the intentional adoption of aesthetic emotions while performing in a theatrical production. This might sound impossible. It's not. It's unusual, like Paganini playing Rossini's Mose in Egitto on one string was unusual, but not impossible. Most people don't need or even want to achieve that level of mastery. It's too much work. But like learning to play the fiddle to any degree of proficiency will improve your physical coordination, deepen your aesthetic appreciation of music, and afford opportunities to connect with others, even if you have no interest in trying to be a psychedelic Itzhak Perlman, training with the method that produces visionary virtuosity can vastly enrich your life across multiple dimensions. You can become a line who can bend. Part 7. Results. Thesis. This book presents a thesis. Training with psychedelic medicine in a progressive, skill-building manner can lead to the realization of one's physical, emotional, intellectual, spiritual, cognitive, creative, social, and moral potentials. This progressive, skill-building training, of course, is the phonomantic method. The phonomantic method is an effective means for realizing those potentials because in ceremony, it demands their expression. But it doesn't stop there. Like Fight Club gets to be a reason for going to the gym and keeping your hair cut short and cutting your nails, wanting to get more out of ceremonies can motivate you to imagine the best version of yourself, then work hard every day to achieve it. Those efforts are part of the phonomantic method too. Phonomantic training occurs inside and outside ceremony. So do its benefits. Life in 8 dimensions. The map may not be the territory, but when you need to cross some territory, a map certainly doesn't hurt, am I right? That's why I've taken the liberty of defining 8 dimensions of self that can be improved via training with the phonomantic method. They are universal. We all have potential to develop in each of these categories, and therefore we should, even if it's an area that we tend to avoid because it bores us or makes us uncomfortable. Like stones in an arch, the 8 dimensions are mutually supporting. A weak spot could lead to collapse. N equals 1. Given that I'll be describing these 8D training effects based solely on 5 years of self-experimentation, I have a sample size of 1. Of course, so did the Buddha when he began teaching. Physical. If someone were to ask me, how do I get started with the phonomantic method? I'd tell them, begin by learning to squat correctly. Don't just sit and stand, break it down into constituent positions, each with an aesthetic ideal. Master those, then build up the full movement. After that, apply this exacting approach to learning other fundamental exercises like pull-ups, push-ups, hip hinges, etc. Once these movements have been learned, stress test your technique by progressively increasing load and later intensity. Only advance to more complex exercises when you've mastered the basics. An entheatainment like the First Church of David Bowie's Shamanic Cabaret will have you dancing on and off for 4 hours. That requires physical stamina. It may have moments that cause emotional discomfort. Pushing through them will demand determination and grit. Physical training develops such capacity and qualities. A physical training program based on the careful approach described above will do so safely, as well as promote a conscientiousness that will serve you well in the phonomantic method. And although everyone should know how to correctly execute movements like the squat and the push-up, this physical training doesn't have to be traditional S&C or CrossFit. It could be Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or kettlebell sport or rock climbing or hot yoga. It can be whatever, as long as it requires precision and at least occasionally makes some serious demands on your capacities. The ability to suffer to accomplish a goal, or as Nietzsche might put it, bear any how to realize a why, is a phonomantic survival skill that is learned most easily first in the body. Emotional. Training with the phonomantic method increases emotional self-control, emotional flexibility, emotional plasticity, emotional range, and improves your default emotional stance. Emotional self-control. Self-control, one of the visionary sub-skills, is the ability to manage disturbing emotions and remain effective, even in stressful situations. Practicing self-control in ceremony improves your ability to exercise restraint in everyday life. Over time, you'll notice you've developed an emotional buffer that allows you to choose your response to a stressor rather than simply react. You still feel the discomfort, but you don't reflexively relieve it with an expression of anger or impatience. Actually, you can go even further. By holding the stress, then sublimating, you can use that energy to affect a consciously chosen purpose. Emotional flexibility. The ability to flexibly regulate emotions in a context-appropriate manner. Emotional flexibility is both the sine qua non of phonomancy and a life skill. Even if you've got the self-control not to act out in response to negative feelings, if you can't let them go, if you remain mired in those states, it steals your energy. Improved emotional flexibility will help you recover your equilibrium more quickly. In ceremony, we continuously self-monitor. We ask ourselves, is this how I want to feel in this moment? And if the answer is no, we take steps to change our state. That's emotional flexibility. Once you've learned to do this while under the psychic load of a high dose, doing it when stuck in traffic is child's play. The means for effecting this emotional state change while in ceremony are techniques based on the concept of emotional plasticity. Emotional plasticity. Part of ceremonial self-control is learning to deal with feelings of anxiety, depression, or fear that inhibit your efforts to enter target emotional states or even derail you altogether. This is supported by developing non-medication-based strategies to deal with anxiety or depression in your everyday life. Naturopathy theory states that experiences create neural circuits, that this wiring triggers brain states, and brain states become persistent with reinforcement. That is, feeling bad gets easier with practice. Luckily, so does feeling good. The concept of emotional plasticity refers to the idea that persistent brain states and reflexive response can be changed. It's possible to interrupt and repattern maladaptive emotional habits. By promoting neuroplasticity, the substantia aids this process. One technique to allay anxiety and depression is to practice gratitude. As soon as you notice apparently unsourced negative feelings, start compiling a list of things for which you are grateful, no matter how seemingly trivial or mundane. I'm grateful I have the discipline to brush my teeth every morning. I'm grateful I have access to running water. I'm grateful no one is currently dropping bombs on me, etc. Another is expressing loving kindness to yourself, saying out loud, "You are loved, you are loved, you are loved," and meaning it can exorcise unhelpful feelings. Speak to yourself exactly as you would to a beloved friend who needs reassurance. Aim your words at your physical heart. Feel the vibration of your voice in your sternum, and to avoid the words becoming nonsensical through repetition, articulate them in a different way with each utterance. Both techniques can be repurposed to feel love for and from the divine, both inside and outside of ceremony. Simply direct your gratitude towards the goddess as one person to another. For the "You are loved" mantra, imagine the goddess is talking through you, to you. Emotional range. The target emotions of songs in a phonomantic rite may well be outside the normative experience of many participants. The Mastodon song Blood and Thunder, for instance, offers you the opportunity to feel rage by identifying with the character Captain Ahab from Moby Dick. That might make you uncomfortable. Many, if not most people, avoid situations in life that give rise to such emotions. That doesn't mean the capacity to feel such violent anger isn't there. It's just buried in the shadow. Phonomancy grants the opportunity to dig out rage, to learn about it, even exult in it, within a safe container. It does the same for positive emotions with which people might be unfortunately unfamiliar, like salvific joy or noble self-sacrifice. This can broaden your emotional range. In the phonomantic method, we take an approach very similar to what method actors do. We find these emotions in our past experiences and then embody them. We experiment with situation-based variations to create aesthetic effects. Not only does this have tremendous impact on your visionary space and ceremony, conscious adoption of emotion complexifies your character and expands your potential experiences in life. By increasing your emotional range, you'll learn more ways to be human. You'll be more human. Emotional stance. Attitude is a settled way of thinking or feeling about someone or something, typically one that is reflected in a person's behavior. It's the one aspect of your existence over which you have 100% control. Your default attitude is your emotional stance. It is the set point for your spiritual homeostasis. The phonomantic method suggests that the optimal emotional stance is ferocious joy, as summed up in our interpretation of Nietzsche's amor fati, namely, fuck yeah. Saying fuck yeah to things which bring us joy is gratitude for grace, and saying fuck yeah to that which makes us suffer is gratitude for challenge. It is an unreconstructed prayer. Like everything else we've discussed, the strength of your emotional stance can be improved with effort, and consistent practice makes it easier to recover should an untoward event knock you off center. Making fuck yeah your habitual attitude is the second best defense against resistance inside and outside of ceremony. Intellectual. An ayahuasquero once told me, "Shamanism is a path of the heart. You'll never understand it with the intellect." After 5 years of intensive training with the phonomantic method, I get what he means. As it says in the prayer I recite at the beginning of the cabaret, "Please make my heart the portal through which I enter my experience today." Emotion equals energy equals spirit is the 3-in-1 formula I've arrived at. The goddess we can encounter in our consciousness is an omniscient emotional gestalt. She cannot be grasped, only experienced. But I wouldn't say that intellectual understanding can't deepen that felt experience. To get more out of your phonomantic training, study up on shamanism, mysticism, Gnosticism, Hermeticism, mystery religions, yoga, Jungian psychology, transpersonal psychology, developmental psychology, world history, religious history, comparative religion, comparative mythology, the perennial philosophy, chaos magic, neuroscience, ethnopharmacology, the history of art, strength and conditioning theory, the Billboard Top 100 since 1955, musicology, pop culture history, screenwriting, method acting theory, contemporary dance, and stage design. All that, plus whatever else strikes your fancy and seems relevant. The ancient Greeks had words for different forms of knowledge. Gnosis meant knowledge based on direct and immediate experience. Episteme was the word for knowledge gleaned from systematic reasoning and study. Don't let your episteme override your gnosis. Your study should only illuminate your experience. What has primacy, always, is how you feel about what you discover when you consume the substantia, crank up the tunes, close your eyes, and concentrate. Spiritual. For purposes of this discussion, we'll break spiritual potential into 2 categories: your capacity to have peak experiences that involve a direct experience of transpersonal reality, and your capacity to sustain belief in those experiences in the face of resistance from within and without. Gnosis. Gnosis is simply the most convenient term to represent the experiences obtainable via the phonomantic method. My usage of the word has almost nothing to do with Gnosticism, a set of beliefs held by various religions in the Greco-Roman world, and most famously by sects of early Christianity that were later persecuted out of existence. As noted earlier, my personal experiences of direct, immediate knowledge of the divine in ceremony can be sorted into 4 categories: belief space, enthusiasm, theophany, and revelation. My intuition tells me that others using the phonomantic method may get similar results, especially enthusiasms, but I would expect the phenomenological content of their experiences would be different, and honestly, I'd be disappointed if people didn't also obtain other kinds of gnosis utterly unlike mine. The 8 dimensions of self I've defined tend to be cross-reinforcing. In other words, your ability to realize your spiritual potential by achieving gnosis in ceremony can be supported by cultivating your cognitive potential via meditation, your creative potential via developing your singing, dancing, and acting skills, your moral potential via acts of service to others, and etc. Belief. I conjecture that each of us has a unique one-to-one relationship with the source of being, and therefore no 2 gnoses can ever be the same. I also think that what we do have in common, and what will be the vehicle for the true manifestation of our spiritual potential, is the challenge we face as we try to integrate intense visionary experiences into our everyday lives. In the narrative description of Pa Mercury's work with the Tool Song 46 and 2, he has an experience of moving out of Maya into belief space. In belief space, you can communicate with your spirit clan. Revelations arrive that seem to have been sent down the network by higher order aspects of yourself. You may even catch glimpses of the Holy Ma and her consort, the Horned One, and you'll wonder how you could have ever doubted the truth of it all. But is it real? Resistance whispers. Such experiences are available to anyone willing to put in the work. When you have them, you'll know, without a doubt, that you are not just imagining things. In the depths of your consciousness, you have encountered something packed with more coherent detail than you can process, something freighted with more meaning than you've ever felt. It staggered you, beguiled you, ravished you, exalted you, took away all your fears. Is it real though? Resistance asks again. Like, really real? Then the effects of the substantia wear off, and the next day you go back to work, and you take your kids to soccer practice, and soon it all starts to seem like just a dream. The problem is there is no way to empirically verify any of it, and on top of that, our culture is actively hostile to claims of such experiences, because if they were true, it would radically undermine, if not destroy, our economic and social order. Hence the mockery and the accusations of psychosis, and the occasional auto-da-fe, and maybe worst of all, the faintly horrified expression on the faces of your family and friends as you try to explain what has happened. There's intense social pressure to disregard your own experience. Not real, Resistance concludes smugly. It comes down to this. Your experiences are real if you can continue to believe in their validity once you've re-entered Maya, which is not easy. Maya is resistance as field. It is a feature of this level of reality. It's like spiritual gravity, a force that pulls everything down. It's both external and internal. It disparages every glimpse of the transcendent. It denies meaning. It promotes despair. Our job is to strengthen our spirits until we can not only stand up against the crushing force of Maya and resistance, but leap tall buildings in a single bound. It's to reify our belief until we can carry the weight of all the world's denial, like Atlas with the universe on his shoulders, and still feel light enough to dance a little soft shoe. It's to burnish our emotional stance until even the darkest storm can't dim our shine. The only way to do that is to work at it, old school style. Meditate, pray, fast. Seek out the company of others who share your spiritual aspirations so you can support each other when your confidence in your experiences begins to crumble. Do whatever it takes to reinforce tertiary process thinking and stay connected to that mystery you felt in ceremony. Believe. It gets easier with practice. Cognitive. The phonomantic method helps develop your cognitive potential by requiring you to learn, remember, and problem solve while under the psychic load of a heavy dose of psychedelic. At higher levels, it also develops the primary cognitive ability, paying attention, by requiring you to switch back and forth at will between mindfulness and concentration. Mindfulness, being intensely aware of what you're sensing and feeling in the moment without interpretation or judgment, is the ready state you maintain while awaiting the arrival of interesting content in your visionary space. Concentration, the practice of directed thought whereby attention is placed on a single object of focus, is how you engage with what comes up. This can become an interesting exercise in deliberately attempting to reroute images emerging from the unconscious through the visual cortex in order to see them as clearly as you would in a lucid dream, that is, open the third eye. If you're feeling particularly sensitive and the music is hitting you just right, you can actually induce powerful visionary experiences by starting with concentration on your physical heart, which tends to be a locus of positive emotion. This will quickly excite a response from the substantia, and then you can shift your attention to your visionary space. Outside of ceremony, mindfulness practices like vipassana and one-pointed concentration techniques like mantra meditation strengthen your ability to pay attention. They also support the visionary subskill of clarity, the lucidity of thought that allows you to articulately describe what it is you are experiencing. A great in-ceremony exercise for developing this capacity is narrating your visions in real time on video. This can be extremely helpful when reconstructing high-dose experiences. Creative. The goddess is the genius who came up with the very idea of good ideas. The divine is creativity, and if you expose yourself to her regularly via the phonomantic method, you'll start to pile up more good ideas than you could possibly implement. Write them down after ceremony. Next day, give the first one a go. If it seems promising, finish it. If you like the final product, put it out into the world for the rest of us to enjoy. If not, put it in the circular file. Either way, work on the next idea. It was a gift from her to you. It'd be a sin to let it go to waste. At the same time, you can be developing another aspect of your creative potential by cultivating the performative skills phonomancy depends on. In terms of potential realization, you can make some real cheddar here because these skills are pan-dimensional. For instance, singing is creative, but also physical, demanding muscular control and proprioceptive sense, emotional, requiring courage, self-control, and self-overcoming, intellectual, if you take the time to study the anatomy and physics involved, spiritual, because singing connects your ego to your soul, cognitive, alternately concentrating, self-monitoring, and correcting as you navigate the 4 stages of competence, social, and even moral, if you use it in a way that manifestly makes someone else's life better. Similar claims can be made for dancing and acting. You'll never master these arts, but by studying and practicing them, you'll vastly expand your ability to express yourself, your means to connect with others, and in a phonomantic context, to achieve gnosis. 7 Blind Women and the Elephant. You are a unique individual, and your relationship to the source of your being is just as unique. Paint your experience of it, sing it, write it, dance it, phonomance it, whatever it. Put it in a form the rest of us can learn from. We need to see the goddess through your eyes to better understand her ourselves. Social. Communitas is a feeling of belonging shared among those who have survived a challenge together. People who have survived natural disasters and war often bond this way, but so did the members of my old CrossFit gym. Part of the reason why someone who just completed a demanding workout might say they couldn't wait to do it again, even though it sucked, is because they'd be repeating the experience alongside friends they'd made while suffering. The ordeal was a good deal because it bought belonging. Communitas is hard to come by these days, but it's important. As Kurt Vonnegut said, the most daring thing is to create stable communities in which the terrible disease of loneliness can be cured. As a kind of psychospiritual CrossFit, the phonomantic method practiced in a group context can provide the challenge that creates communitas, and thus offers a new way to treat the loneliness that's endemic in our society. Anchoring our peak experiences in our relationships is the very best defense against the depredations of resistance. Prioritize your ability to connect to, care for, and cooperate with others. It's what gives meaning to our efforts. It's the point of it all. Moral. Exposure to the divine presence via phonomantic gnosis seems to initiate a transformation in one's ideas regarding the proper relationship of self to world. It's similar to the cognitive shock that accompanies an experience of mystical union obtained via meditation, that is, samadhi, nirvana, theosis. Due to the fact this experience is caused by a psychedelic medicine whose effects wear off, this transformation is temporary. However, it does seem to cause persistent beneficial psychological change that increases over time. This change occurs in 3 stages. First, there is a noticeable uptick in the activity of one's conscience. Every action you take, even every thought you have, is scrutinized by a mental voice that can be productively imagined as your soul. This presence acts as a performance coach that praises you when your behavior meets its standards and points out when it does not. These standards are largely congruent with the moral prescriptions made by the major religions, do unto others, etc. No need to reinvent the wheel here. As described in the Cabaret, the soul is a living portrait of the goddess, given to you at birth to keep you company and soothe you and call on you to realize all your potential. Superconductor. In ceremony, one of the lead phonomancer's jobs is to superconduct the divine by entering ecstatic trance states live and on stage. The idea is that participants who are in a sensitive state may be able to empathically sense the LP's experience of enthusiasm or theophany. If they can feel it through the LP, it may trigger their own release into belief space or further. The phonomantically awakened soul's purpose seems to be reorganizing your consciousness so that you can perform such superconduction while not tripping. It's not an obliteration of your ego that it seeks, but increased transparency. It wants your personality to become like a stained glass window that can be illuminated by the light of the divine within. This transparency is created by refraining from complaint and by engaging in activities that make the lives of others easier at some cost to you in terms of time, money, attention, discomfort, or effort. Archetype. In the third stage of moral potential development, you are able to consciously access, while sober and subject to Maya, certain archetypes that people around you may experience as having healing energy. Imagine, as part of your everyday experience, truly effortlessly loving everyone around you as if they were your own children and behaving accordingly. This would require flow state archetypal activation and identification, in this case of the divine mother or father. Working in proximity to such forces without succumbing to inflation would require a fantastically stable ego structure. The potentials of all 8 dimensions of yourself would have to be profoundly realized. You'd need Olympic level, or perhaps Olympus level, psychospiritual fitness. Psychospiritual fitness. Physical fitness means different things to different people. For some, it means the capacity to perform athletically or, depending on your job, vocationally at a high level. Many see it as a condition for optimal health. Others might define it as more a matter of aesthetics, of muscle mass and body fat percentage. What's discussed less often is how fitness feels. To be physically fit is to feel good. There's a sense of tensile strength, of energy, of readiness, even eagerness for whatever challenges might arise. There is an equivalent psychological state. It also has aspects in terms of capacity, constitution, aesthetics, and qualia. It's categorized by potent well-being, sensitivity, vivacity, sanguinity, and stalwartness, plus a lived sense of gratitude for grace. At higher levels, it includes what we could call a sense of expanded area of tactical responsibility. Because you've got yourself sorted, you can afford to spend more time and energy looking out for the people around you, loved ones and strangers alike. At the highest level, apparently this sense of tactical responsibility becomes absolute as one permanently transfers the locus of identity from self to archetypal self. The personality glows with the light within. It is beautiful. Let's call this equivalent psychological state psychospiritual fitness. It's how you feel as you actively pursue the development of the various skills and dimensions of self this book has described. Like physical fitness, it's achieved through disciplined, focused effort and the virtuous cycle of work and rest, of stress and adaptive response, enacted over time. And like physical fitness, there's no end to it. You're never done. You can always get fitter, which means you can always feel better and take better care of your fellow human beings. Let's hit the gym, hey? Part 8. Reply to HUSTON Smith. Challenge accepted. In his book Cleansing the Doors of Perception, world religion scholar HUSTON Smith wrote, "Drugs appear to be able to induce religious experiences. It's less evident they can produce religious lives. The conclusion to which the evidence seems to currently point is that it is indeed possible for chemicals to enhance the religious life, but only when they are set within the context of faith, that is, conviction that what they disclose is true, and discipline, exercise of the will toward fulfilling what the disclosures ask of us. Nowhere today in Western civilization are both these conditions met." Challenge accepted, Dr. Smith. Faith. The first church of David Bowie's shamanic cabaret has a frame story that is an apocalyptic myth. Specifically, it explains how and why we're facing the end of the world and what we can do to prevent it. Engaging in participation mystique with that story while in ceremony, that is, immersing yourself in the cabaret's alternate reality game, is tremendously beneficial to your phonomantic efforts. Continuing to play that ARG outside of ceremony is the key to the phonomantic method's efficacy as a vehicle for personal transformation. In other words, the cabaret is a game of make-believe that can yield real-world results. But guess what? So is every religion. Watch now as I proceed to offend about 90% of the world. There is no evidence to support HUSTON's conviction of disclosed truth for any religion's claims, except for the experiences of adherents who, whether by inherited tradition, proselytization, or earnest searching, have been introduced to a story and made the decision, conscious or not, to believe it is true. Jesus rose from the dead after 3 days? That's a story. The Quran is based on revelation received by Muhammad from the Archangel Gabriel? That's a story. Siddhartha Gautama achieved perfect Buddhahood by sitting under the Bodhi tree for 49 days. That's a story too. Modern scholarship indicates it's very unlikely the accounts we have were recorded by eyewitnesses. So do these stories accurately describe real events? Are they true? Until someone invents a time machine, there's just no way to know for sure. As Carl Sagan said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. Lacking that, perhaps the best we can say is that they are quasi-fictional. They are imaginally true. And that's all they need to be. For followers of traditional religions, these stories are instruction manuals for achieving the kind of supernatural elevation enjoyed by their protagonists. They're also interpretive models that can be used to make sense of life, give hope for the future, and create social cohesion. By believing in these quasi-fictional stories, followers of traditional religions immerse themselves in a game of make-believe that enables and conditions an experience of the sacred while simultaneously generating community. This is very similar to how participants engage with the cabaret ARG. The difference is phonomancers know they are playing a game. This insight is important because recognizing religion as a game means we can stop looking only backward at stories that may or may not be true. We can stop trying to fix what is now irreparably broken. We can stop being so damned literal. The innovational history of religion doesn't have to be over. We are free to create new and ever more sophisticated and involving and efficacious games. The phonomantic method and its entheatainment set chemically induced religious experiences in the context of a new kind of faith that is no less earnest or life-changing for being self-aware that it is quasi-fictional. It's a game that becomes real the moment it puts you up close and personal with the goddess. Credo quia iocis et quia operator. Discipline. In Mark 12, verses 30 to 31, Jesus said, "Love the Lord God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these." And Aldous Huxley said, "We can only love what we know, and we can never know completely what we do not love. Love is a mode of knowledge." The phonomantic method's stated main goal is gnosis, direct and immediate knowledge of the divine. The experience of gnosis not only transforms your relationship with the mystery by opening your heart, expanding your knowledge, and deepening your understanding, it inevitably changes the way you treat your fellow human beings. In a dim but wonderful way, you become an aspect of the goddess who loves them and wants to relate to them as a person. Not that you become a perfect ascended master overnight, but you can't be exposed to these energies without beginning to take on some characteristics of that PAM archetype, or at the very least, become naggingly aware when your thoughts and actions fall short of that ideal. Achieving phonomantic gnosis is not easy. It's the result of disciplined efforts made to develop skill with psychedelic medicine. It demands courage and sacrifice. It depends on your ability to realize your potential across 8 dimensions of self. When Huston Smith wrote that nowhere in Western civilization could he find an example of entheogenic mysticism being joined to an exercise of the will toward fulfilling what the disclosures ask of us, he may have been correct at the time. I hope I've provided evidence that what he was looking for has now arrived. The medicine we need. The experience of most any activity you can do alone can be amplified and intensified by doing it alongside others. This is certainly true for the mystical experiences induced by psychedelics. However, for this to work on any scale larger than a gathering of a few close friends, people need to be able to hold space for themselves while in an altered state in public, so that any challenges that might arise for them don't become someone else's problem. The phonomantic method develops this kind of self-control. Individual training with the phonomantic method is preparation for the kinds of ecstatic ceremonies that were once, long ago, the norm in religious practice. Communities consumed the substantia and partied and carried on until their spirits caught fire and the gods spoke from the flames and people listened and learned. That's the medicine our civilization needs. In the modern era, Grateful Dead shows and Burning Man and Psytrance festivals have been steps back in the right direction. By yoking that kind of wild joy to hard work via structure, stress, and skill, entheotainments, those theatrical spectacles designed to create an immediate apprehension of the sacred, can take ecstatic religion all the way into the future. What you love is a vehicle for the holy. Early in the development of the phonomantic method, I realized that anything you love can be a vehicle for the holy. All the rock and pop songs in the First Church of David Bowie Shamanic Cabaret, those are my Icaros, sacred songs I can use to open to the divine. You've got your own. And if we've got some sacred songs in common, well, by God, let's have a party. There could be as many kinds of entheotainments as there are artists to create them and people to enjoy them. Each would be a portrait of the divine as the artist understands it. And if you can't find an entheotainment that appeals to you, you can always get together with your friends and make your own. It is my most sincere hope that the phonomantic method creates millions of virtuosic visionaries who endlessly innovate new ways to experience God. The psychedelic future of religion. Unlike in our contemporary versions of religion, in this psychedelic faith of the future, everyone will know it's all a matter of taste. There will be no correct entheotainment, no spectacle that has a lock on truth. People could visit a nightclub that is also a church to take part in a ritual that allows them to experience transcendent reality as goddess, and the next month attend another entheotainment that creates a way to access the divine and its aspect is void, and then later one that worships the earth as a self-aware superorganism. The timid will stick with familiar versions of God, while the adventurous can pursue ever more outre visions of the mystery. Hopefully someday, nimble, pragmatic curiosity will be the common attitude towards spiritual practice, instead of dead-eyed and heavy-footed orthodoxy. When assessing their options, people will ask, does this game of high-stakes make-believe get me up close and personal with the deity of my choice? Will it change me? Will it charge me? Does it really work? Because in the end, when it comes to religion, whether it really works is all that matters. The religious future of psychedelics. Of course, the same could be said of the phonomantic method. Give it a shot. Let me know how it goes. Part 9. Postscript. The point of it all. Though dazzled by the line's newfound talent, the dot still wanted to be fair. She gave the squiggle a chance to show what he could do. But when he trepidatiously performed his 4 dance steps, the only ones he knew, she sighed, unceremoniously dumped him, and began a torrid romance with the line. Then one day the dot, who really was a startling beauty and a multi-talented performer, was discovered by a film producer slumming it at the Jukebox Cafe. He cast her in a movie, and she went away to Hollywood forever. This left the line terribly bereft, of course, but he had the consolation of his art, which he had come to call StereoMyth, because in the yogic trances his contortional designs required, he often got glimpses of the sacred geometry of the future. As word got around about his innovations, a few forms showed interest, and then a few more. Soon he had students. Together they planned and executed large-scale works that enjoyed widespread acclaim. Critics lauded him as a virtuosic visionary. The line wrote several books explaining his techniques. They sold well. Now all kinds of curious forms were discovering his methods could work for them, too. They formed clubs with others who shared their enthusiasm so they could pool knowledge and resources. Together they learned new ways to be. The dawning realization that anyone could be a stereomantic artist if they were just willing to put in the effort, and that the rewards in terms of new friends and life satisfaction more than justified the frustrations and occasional tears, made a big impact on the line's society. It was pulled in a new, eudaimonic direction. Even the squiggle came around eventually. His drinking had become a problem after the dot jilted him, but in rehab his sponsor introduced him to stereomancy. The squiggle found the practice really helped him straighten out his head. Within a couple years, he held his first performance. When the line heard about this, he had to see it for himself. He was amazed to find the squiggle not only acquitted himself well, but his work offered a conceptual twist. He choreographed his shape change into music. It blew the line's mind and galvanized him creatively. After sending an admiring note, the line struck up a friendship with the squiggle based on mutual respect and their wistful, nostalgic affection for the dot, who is now a celluloid goddess. Eventually, their camaraderie grew into a fruitful, decades-long artistic collaboration. One evening, after a day spent rehearsing, the line was enjoying a pint next to the squiggle, who had cranberry juice, at the cafe where they'd first met. Even in his dotage, the squiggle had trouble sitting still for long. After 5 minutes, he announced he felt like cutting a rug and got up to put a quarter in the jukebox. When his friend made his selection and the carnival lit Wurlitzer whirred to life, the line was suddenly overcome by a memory so intense it was almost a hallucination. He set down his glass with a thump. This song! He knew this song. It was the very record that had been playing when he'd shown the Dot how he'd learned to bend. Listening now, he could practically see her there on the dance floor, the spinning, bouncing, inscrutable embodiment of grace and joy. Once again, he was racked with the sweetest of life's pains. He gave thanks to the geometer for the capacity to feel it so intensely. His love for the Dot had catalyzed the realization of his potential. She had changed his life, and all these years later, her image inspired him still. Everywhere the center of a sphere whose circumference was nowhere, the Dot was, and always had been, the point of it all. She made him feel like dancing. Smiling, the line joined the squiggle and did just that. They danced the night away.